tonight, you are walking into the Valley of Laws, where Vikings do not shout, they file complaints. Tents go up, stew simmers, and everyone waits their turn to politely argue about grass, debts, missing bowls, and a sheep with a very suspicious talent for getting involved. If you want calm sleep-time bureaucracy with gentle sarcasm and soft drama, settle in. The Thing is now in session. Chapter 1. The Long Walk to the Valley. They arrived in a slow thread across the hills, the way a river arrives at a lake. From far away it looked accidental, a drifting scatter of cloaks and carts. Up close it was a proper procession with a rhythm to it, boots on packed earth, wheel spokes complaining softly, and the quiet snorts of pack ponies trying to convince the world that none of this had been their idea. The Valley of Laws sat between low hills and a wide lake that held the sky like a careful promise. In summer the grass looked calm and forgiving, which was how it tempted people into believing grass never caused trouble. Grass always caused trouble. If a person wanted peace, the first step was to avoid owning land. Most people skipped that step with confidence. The Thing was not a festival. It did not pretend to be a festival. It was a tool. People arrived with disputes folded into their baggage like spare shirts. They tried to set those disputes down without anyone noticing how heavy they were. They failed in the usual way, by looking calm while their eyes stayed too sharp. The first tents went up in the early afternoon. Canvas rose in neat rows that were almost straight. Humans loved order the way they loved warm bread. They wanted it, they praised it, and they expected someone else to keep it fresh. That someone was Ingrid Reed. Ingrid walked the forming lanes with a bundle of stakes under her arm and a look that did not invite creative opinions. She was not tall, but her focus had the weight of a stone. When she pointed, people moved. They told themselves they were moving because the suggestion was sensible, not because Ingrid made indecision feel embarrassing. Families here, traders there, people who claim they are only listening over by the waterline, where their listening could be supervised. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. The camp learned quickly that the first law of the Thing was that the tents would be where Ingrid decided they belonged, and the second law was that nobody wanted to be the person Ingrid had to correct twice. By the cooking fires, early arrivals began the quiet work of feeding strangers. Pots were set on stones, water was fetched, roots were chopped into pieces that looked generous and were measured with the care of people who had fed crowds before. Smoke drifted low, the air carried the smell of broth and the more serious smell of decision. Leif Miller arrived with dust on his cloak and the bright expression of a man who had walked too far and turned it into a personal victory. He was a messenger when there was a message, and an observer when there was not, which meant he was never without a reason to be present. He paused beside a tent that leaned like a tired animal and offered advice in the friendly tone of someone who had once read a rope with success. "Angle the line a little lower," he offered. "The wind will slide past instead of biting." The tent owner angled the line. The wind bit anyway. The owner stared at Leif with the patient disappointment reserved for relatives and helpful strangers. Leif accepted the look as a fair payment and moved on. He had been forgiven by worse. Near the centre of camp was the open space where the Thing would sit. No walls, no roof, the sky as witness, the lake as mirror, and the hills as the kind of audience that remembered everything while pretending not to listen. Owen Greybeard arrived late, which was his quiet habit. He did not enter with drama. He arrived with the calm gravity of a man who knew exactly where he was going and did not require applause to get there. His hair was mostly grey and tied back. His beard was trimmed, not from vanity, but from experience. People listened better when they were not distracted by loose hairs in the wind. His cloak had been mended many times, each stitch a small vote for practicality. Harold Ash walked beside him with a slate board tucked under one arm and a roll of waxed cord under the other. Harold was not the law speaker, but he was the reason the law speaker did not drown in details. Harold had the steady intensity of a man who believed that if he did not write something down, it would escape into chaos, and then everyone would have to talk about it again. They paused at the edge of the open space. Owen looked across the camp, across canvas and smoke and the patient lake beyond. A good year for walking, he observed. Harold glanced at the sky like a clerk checking a document. It has been dry, he answered, as if dryness was something you could sign for. Owen nodded, satisfied. Dry walking. A gift to the ankles and a curse to the throats. The first day of the thing was mostly preparation. People registered disputes, named claims, and listed witnesses they had dragged along in the name of truth. Some arrived with confidence, which was always a warning. Others arrived with humility, which was also a warning. In law, sincerity was often just another costume. Owen stepped into the open space when the sun began to soften. His opening words were traditional and quietly optimistic, the way a person might speak to a dog that had already stolen food. We are here to keep the peace. Then he added the parts that made peace possible. We will speak in turn, we will listen, we will accept decisions, even when those decisions are disappointing in a very personal way. A low ripple of agreement moved through the crowd, not because everyone agreed, but because everyone enjoyed the idea of being reasonable while preparing to be unreasonable later. Owen lifted a hand slightly. Familiarity did the rest. The crowd quieted because they had learned that letting the law speaker speak made their own turn arrive sooner. Harold will keep the record. If Harold asks you to repeat yourself, it is because he enjoys accuracy. Respect that. Harold lifted his slate a fraction, a man accepting a burden he had already been carrying most of his life. Ingrid will keep the camp. If Ingrid tells you to move your tent, you will move it. If you feel a strong desire to argue, you may file that desire and return to it after the thing is finished. A small sound moved through the crowd that might have been laughter, but nobody claimed it. Owen took a slower breath and offered one last gentle warning. If you have a dispute, dress it in facts. If you have a grudge, try to make it sound respectable. If you have gossip, keep it to yourselves, which mean whisper it at a safe distance and pretend it is public service. That earned a warmer murmur. People liked a leader who described them accurately, especially when it was a little unkind. By the time the sun slid low, the first dispute was already forming like weather. Everyone knew it. Everyone had heard one version on the road, a better version at the cooking fires, and a dramatic version near the waterline. By evening it had become a camp story with a beginning, a middle, and several possible villains. It was about a boundary stone. A boundary stone was not romantic. It was a lump of rock set into earth, meant to be dull, permanent, and boring. It existed to prevent arguments. Like many objects designed to prevent arguments, it attracted them instead. Cedric North claimed the stone marking the edge of his meadow had shifted in the night. He carried the steady outrage of a man who believed the universe should respect property lines. His neighbour, Eamon Vale, claimed the stone had not moved at all. He carried the calm confidence of a man who knew exactly how guilty he looked, and decided to appear innocent by being extremely polite about it. They did not shout. Shouting was for people without patience or witnesses. Cedric and Eamon spoke in careful, low voices, the voices of men who had to live beside each other after the thing, and wanted to keep their hatred within legal limits. In a narrow lane between tents, Cedric held his hands behind his back as if he was restraining them. You know the stone has shifted. Eamon kept his face mild. I know the stone is still a stone. Cedric blinked slowly. The restraint was impressive. It suggested practice. Do not pretend words mean nothing. My father placed it. His father placed the first marker. Stones do not wander. Eamon let out a gentle breath that sounded like sympathy. Fathers do love their sons having extra grass. Cedric stared at him for a heartbeat, then chose the official path to conflict, which was one of the best inventions their people had ever made. Then we walk the line tomorrow, we bring witnesses, we bring cord, we bring Harold and his slate, so even your clever mouth cannot twist the marks. Eamon nodded, the picture of cooperation. Very well. I will bring witnesses too. People who can see straight, and do not confuse memory with ownership. They parted without flourish. Each man returned to his tent with the satisfaction of having chosen procedure over nonsense. The thing at its best took private anger and turned it into public steps. It did not remove the anger, but it made it less likely to spill into sleepless nights for everyone nearby. Later, Leif drifted toward the cooking fires. He wore the expression of a man seeking warmth, which was one of his favourite disguises. A group sat near the largest pot, hands busy, voices low. They were peeling roots, stirring broth, and exchanging small observations that sounded harmless until you realized they were building a map of the entire camp. Leif offered a greeting and a complaint, because complaints were the fastest currency in a temporary village. "I have been walking since dawn. I am mostly dust now. Is there any chance the stew might restore my humanity?" An older woman with sharp eyes looked him over. "That depends. Are you the kind of man who complains about stew?" "Never. I only observe stew." That earned him a place near the heat and a bowl that steamed politely. The older woman tilted her head toward the pot like it had committed a personal offence. The pot went missing earlier, it returned. Now the stew tastes different. Leif kept his face calm, but his mind sat up straight. A missing pot was not a serious crime. It was a camp mystery, which meant it would be treated as serious by everyone who had nothing else to do. Different how? Different like someone tried to be helpful. Another voice, quieter, added the sharper point. Thinner, like the stew is trying to stretch itself to feed more mouths. Leif took a spoonful and listened to the taste. It was fine. It was also exactly as described, a compromise with a watery afterthought. Someone had made a choice on behalf of everyone, and everyone felt vaguely offended by that generosity. That is a very bold stew. The older woman stirred again, slow circles, steady patience. Someone wants to be seen as generous, or someone took something out and replaced it with water. Leif nodded, as if the camp had just presented him with a legal document. The thing has not even begun, and already we are teaching each other moral lessons. "Do not pretend you are surprised," the older woman reminded him. Leif did not pretend. He ate, he warmed his hands, and he watched the camp settle into its evening hush. Owen sat outside his tent with Harold, reviewing the list of disputes. Ingrid passed once, checking rope lines with a glance. Leif watched them all and felt the particular comfort of a place where people trusted procedure. It did not solve everything, it did not make everyone kind, but it kept sharp edges wrapped up so fewer people got cut by accident. In the night, Cedric lay awake thinking about stones and grass. Eamon lay awake thinking about how to look innocent while being correct. Edith Stone, newly arrived at the edge of camp, lay awake thinking about inheritance and the way grief had paperwork hidden inside it. Rowan Pike, not yet arrived, lay awake somewhere else thinking about money, which was his favourite lullaby. The Valley of Laws held them all, quiet and patient, and as the last fire fell into coals, the camp shared Ud's soft certainty. Tomorrow they would be heard. Chapter 2. The Inheritance That Refused to Sit Still. Morning at the Thing began with the gentle cruelty of light. The sun rose early and rose as if it had an appointment. Tents brightened from dark shapes into pale canvas, and then into private rooms that were not private at all. People washed their faces in cold water and pretended it was refreshing. They ate bread and broth and called it strength. They spoke softly because the day was full of other people's problems, and everyone wanted to conserve their voice for their own. Harold Ash moved through the lanes with slate and cord, collecting names and promises like a careful fisherman. He stopped at each tent where a dispute had been registered and reminded the speakers of their time. Say what matters, do not wander, do not tell stories unless the story is evidence. Some nodded solemnly, some looked wounded, as if Harold had insulted their art. Harold did not care. Harold existed to prevent the thing from turning into a long performance that ended with nothing decided. At the open space, Owen Greybeard stood in his usual place, calm posture, patient eyes. He did not look like a man who enjoyed authority. He looked like a man who had accepted that someone needed to do the job and that everyone else was worse at it. The boundary dispute went first, because stones liked to be handled early. Cedric and Eamon walked the line with witnesses and a cord while Harold recorded measurements that were dull, in the way that makes a crowd strangely attentive. Everyone leaned in to hear numbers described in words, which was a kind of group madness that only law could cause. The stone had moved a little, or the soil had slipped, or the memory had softened. Owen listened, asked calm questions, watched the witnesses, and then gave the sort of decision that made both sides feel equally annoyed. The stone would be reset to the agreed measure. Both men would share the cost of marking the line more clearly, because if two adults were going to argue about a strip of meadow, they could at least pay for better proof next year. Cedric looked relieved and slightly offended. Eamon looked satisfied and slightly offended. This was how fair decisions felt. Balance had a way of irritating everyone evenly. By midday, the crowd shifted to make space for a dispute that drew attention in a quieter way. It did not have the blunt drama of a boundary stone. It had the slow tension of family business. Edith Stone stepped forward with two supporters behind her, older women with steady faces and the calm readiness to correct nonsense. Edith was a widow, and she carried herself like someone who had learned to stand firm without needing volume. Her cloak was plain but well kept. Her braid was neat. Her eyes held the quiet message that she would rather be home, which was exactly why she was here. Across from her stood Bram Stone, her late husband's nephew. Bram had a cheerful face and a posture that leaned forward, like he was always offering help. It was an excellent posture for someone trying to look harmless. It was also an excellent posture for someone trying to take a little more than he deserved. Beside Bram stood Alden Brooke, here as a witness and as moral decoration. Alden had anxious eyes, the look of a man who had agreed to support someone and was now wondering what he had agreed to support. Harold wrote down names with the calm satisfaction of a person organizing a storm into columns. Owen lifted a hand. The open space quieted. "Edith," Owen invited, "tell the thing what you claim." Edith breathed in and spoke clearly, without hurry, as if she had decided that rushing only gave fear more space. "My husband died this spring. His name was Thomas Stone. We agreed the house and the land would remain with me. Bram claims part of the house is not mine." Owen turned his gaze, steady and unblinking. "Bram, explain your claim." Bram warmed his smile just enough to look respectful. "I claim nothing that is not fair. My uncle spoke of the house as a family house. He said the back room belonged to the Stone line, not to any single spouse." Edith did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her calm was sharper than most anger. "The back room is the storeroom with the smoke hole above it, the room where we dry fish and keep tools, a room Bram has never cleaned." A low ripple moved through the crowd. Cleaning was not a legal category, but it was a powerful argument. Owen's mouth made the smallest movement toward a smile and returned to calm. "Focus on facts," he reminded them, and then he pulled the dispute into shape with questions that cut away performance. "Edith, what was the arrangement?" Edith answered with precision. She had rehearsed, not because she enjoyed conflict, but because she refused to be vague. "Thomas and I built the extension together. We used our own timber and our own labour. We agreed the extension and the storeroom would be mine if he died before me." He stated this more than once, before witnesses. Owen checked Harold. Harold gave a slight nod. Witnesses were listed. Bram kept his smile, but the edges tightened. "I do not deny she helped, but a family house is more than timber. The storeroom holds family tools, net weights, old iron hooks. Those are stone things." Edith held Bram in a steady look, the kind that makes a person feel gently examined. If Bram wants to claim the tools, he may claim the tools. He is claiming the room because he knows he cannot lift the roof without it. One of Edith's supporters made a soft sound, half throat-clearing, half verdict. Bram lifted his hands in a gesture of harmless honesty, the kind young men practice in front of mirrors. "I only want what my uncle wanted." Owen let the sentence settle for a moment, then placed a question on top of it like a weight. "What did your uncle want, and when did he say it?" Bram hesitated for the smallest moment. In that pause, his story rearranged itself into what he believed would survive daylight. "Last winter, at my father's table." Owen waited, patient as stone. Who heard him? "My father. My mother. Alden Brooke." Alden swallowed. It was small, but in the open air it sounded loud. Owen shifted his gaze to Alden, and the entire crowd leaned forward in spirit without moving a foot. Alden, tell the thing what you heard. Alden stepped forward, his hands clasped as if they might run away. I heard Thomas say the house should stay in the stone line, but I also heard him say Edith should not be put out. He trusted her. Bram's smile slipped for a breath, then returned, thinner. Owen continued in the same calm tone, the tone that made people answer even when they wanted to hide. Did he speak of the back room? Alden blinked, searching memory like a person searching a cluttered shelf. He called the back room useful. He said Edith knows where everything is. He joked that Bram would lose the hooks in a day. A warm murmur moved through the crowd. The humour was accidental, which made it more convincing. Bram tried to smooth it. He was joking. Edith's calm did not crack. Thomas joked when he was honest. It made truth easier to swallow. Owen lifted a hand to quiet the murmurs. He brought in Edith's witnesses, because a good system loved layers. Miles Carter, a carpenter, described building the extension and hearing the agreement spoken plainless. Nora Fenn, a neighbour, described Thomas repeating the same intention more than once, which meant it was not a passing mood. Harold wrote, and the slate filled with facts like a net filling with fish. Then Owen offered the question that mattered, the one that sounded gentle and landed hard. If you wanted to honour your uncle's wishes, why did you wait until the thing, rather than speaking with Edith at home? Bram's posture leaned forward again, offering help like a knife offers to cut bread. I did speak with her. She did not agree. Edith gave a small nod, the nod of someone confirming a detail. He came to my door with cousins and a cart. He spoke of wishes and family and how quickly a widow can be moved if everyone is helpful. The word helpful drifted through the crowd like smoke. Helpful was a dangerous word in a dispute. Bram tried to keep the harmless tone. I only meant support. Owen did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His calm made the next line feel like an official stamp. Support does not usually arrive with a cart. He glanced at Harold. Record that phrasing. Harold's stylus tapped the slate with mild satisfaction. Harold enjoyed words being pinned down. Owen returned his gaze to Bram, and the decision came out with the same evenness as weather. The house, including the extension and the storeroom, remains with Edith as widow. If there are tools that truly belong to the wider family, list them in daylight with neutral witnesses, then divide fairly. Do not treat a room as a tool simply because it is attached to the roof. Alden exhaled in visible relief, like a man setting down a burden he had been pretending was light. Bram wore polite disappointment like a cloak. His eyes for a moment looked sharp. Then he softened again, because sharpness was more convincing when it was hidden. Edith inclined her head, not in triumph but in closure. The thing moved to the second dispute tied to Edith's life, the ones he wished had died quietly with the season and did not. Hugh Reed stepped forward. Not related to Ingrid Reed, though people ask anyway because humans like neat connections. Hugh carried a folded scrap of cloth like it was evidence and also like it had feelings. This concerns a debt. Edith did not look surprised. She looked tired, which was different and more honest. It concerns my husband's debt. Some believe it is also mine. Owen's gaze stayed steadied. Debts were simple in shape, which meant they were often complicated in truth. Hugh explained the loan. Silver last year, repayment promised after autumn trade, repayment never delivered. Now Thomas was gone, and Edith stood where the property stood, which made her the easiest person to blame for time. Finn Wade came forward as witness, broad shoulders, patient face. I saw the silver change hands. I heard Thomas promise repayment after autumn trade. Edith drew in a slow breath and did something brave and boring. She agreed. Thomas did borrow. I did not know the amount at the time. Later he told me it was smaller. Husbands sometimes do that when shame sits on their tongue. A sympathetic murmur moved through the crowd. Shame was universal. It only chose different masks. Owen guided the dispute into the narrow channel where it could flow without flooding. Do you dispute the debts? No. I dispute the way Hugh speaks, as if I hid it. I learned of it after the fact. I will pay what is fair. but I will not be made into a villain to soothe someone else's frustration. Hugh kept his anger on a short leash, controlled and cold. I do not call you a villain, I call you the one standing where my silver should be. Edith gave a small nod. Then we speak of how to pay, not whether. That sentence relieved the crowd more than it should have. People loved a dispute that stayed attached to reality. Owen asked for the amount, Hugh named it. Harold recorded it in words, trapping it safely. Owen asked Edith what she could pay now and what she could pay after the next trade season. Edith answered with clear limits. Hugh argued for more. Owen listened, then shaped a payment plan with the calm tone of a man placing stones in a wall. Fair, firm, and slightly unpleasant for everyone, which meant it would hold. When Owen spoke the final terms, Hugh nodded slowly. Edith nodded slowly. Harold wrote. The crowd released a breath it had been holding without noticing. Afterward, Edith stepped back into the camp lanes with her supporters moving beside her like steady shadows. Leif watched her go and felt the soft ache that came with seeing someone forced to be strong in public. Strength was impressive, and it was also tiring to watch, because it reminded everyone of their own fragile plans. At the cooking fires, the pot problem returned, because nothing stayed small for long. The stew was thinner again. Either someone was stretching supplies for the common good, or someone was borrowing the best broth for a private meal and leaving the camp to swallow the consequences. Both possibilities were irritating, which meant both were plausible. Ingrid Reed approached the fires with the calm expression of a person who had already decided to solve this without anyone noticing. She spoke with the older woman who had noticed it first. Has the pot been left alone? It has been watched, which is how we know someone watched it too. Ingrid listened to a list of names, all ordinary. People fetching water, people stirring, people offering to help. Generosity everywhere, which was the problem. Ingrid nodded once. We will solve this gently. A second pot will sit beside the first. Ingredients will be measured plainly. Anyone who improves the stew may explain the improvement to me, and then the camp will enjoy the explanation. The older woman's mouth twitched. That will unalive the mystery. It will unalive the habit. Leif coughed, pretending it was smoke and not appreciation. Ingrid could make a threat sound like a kindness, which was a rare administrative talent. As evening returned, Owen sat with Harold and reviewed the next day's list. The camp quieted. The lake reflected the last light. People settled into tents with the satisfied tiredness of those who had been heard, and the unsatisfied tiredness of those who would be heard tomorrow. Edith lay down with her mind still moving, but her footing slightly steadier. Bram sat with his family and wore his polite disappointment carefully, as if it might still be useful. Hugh counted future payments in his head and tried to make peace with wait-ins. The Valley of Laws held their worries the way it held the lake's surface, steady and patient until morning. Chapter 3: The Debt of Rowan Pike. The third morning arrived with the soft confidence of a day that believed it would be busy. The lake lay still, the hills kept their silence, the tents held the sleepy sounds of people waking slowly and pretending they had slept well. By now the camp had learned its own rhythm. Families cooked early, traders cooked later, people with disputes cooked whatever was fastest, because worry made the stomach impatient. Ingrid Reed walked the lanes with the same calm focus as always, checking lines, checking fires, checking that nobody had decided to build an extra fence for personal comfort. A camp did not need much to become a city. It needed water, food, and a shared belief that rules existed for other people. Ingrid was the person who reminded everyone that rules existed for everyone, and that the difference between a camp and chaos was mostly her mood. Harold Ashe stood at the edge of the open space and arranged his slate, his cord, and his stylus, as if he was preparing for a long and intimate conversation with human nature. He had already written a list of names, he had already written a list of claims, he had already written the parts that mattered and left space for the parts that would surprise him, which was generous optimism. Owen Greybeard arrived with the same quiet steadiness as the day before. His posture was calm, His expression was neutral in the way that made people feel observed without feeling attacked. He spoke with Harold for a moment, low and practical, then turned toward the growing crowd. There was a different feeling in the camp today. It was not fear. It was not excitement. It was something in between, a shared alertness that came when people expected a familiar trouble. Rowan Pike was coming. Rowan was not a warrior. Rowan was not a poet. Rowan was not a farmer. Rowan was something more dangerous in a place built on land and oaths. Rowan was a trader. He arrived late in the morning, just after the sun had climbed high enough to make everyone aware of their own sweat. His boots were good, which was the first sign. His cloak was clean, which was the second sign. His smile was easy, which was the third sign and the most important. He walked into the trader lane as if the lane had been waiting for him. He nodded at people with the warm familiarity of a man who had borrowed from them, sold to them, promised them, forgiven them, and somehow left everyone feeling as if they owed him gratitude. Leaf Miller spotted him at once, because Leaf had a talent for locating the center of a story. He drifted closer in the gentle way of a man who had simply happened to be walking in exactly the right direction. Rowan clapped Leaf on the shoulder with friendly certainty. Leaf Miller. Still walking like you are trying to outpace your own thoughts. Leaf gave a soft smile, polite and measured. Rowan Pike. Still smiling like you have never disappointed anyone. Rowan laughed quietly, warm sound, controlled volume. I disappoint people constantly, he replied. I just do it in a way that feels like a shared misunderstanding. Leaf accepted this as truth, and as a warning. Ingrid Reed appeared beside Rowan as if she had been standing there all along. She had the list of trader placements in her head, which meant she did not need to carry paper to look official. She looked Rowan over once, quick and calm. Your tent goes there, she indicated, a space that was neither too central nor too far, the kind of placement given to someone who attracted attention, but did not deserve control of the entire lane. Rowan inclined his head as if Ingrid had offered him a gift rather than a boundary. Perfect, he said. Close enough to be found, far enough to avoid the complaints. Ingrid did not smile. Complaints will find you anyway, she reminded him. Rowan's eyes brightened. Then I am truly home, he said. He set up his tent with efficient ease, as if he had done it 100 times, which he had. The canvas went up, the ropes tightened, the display appeared, cloth, needles, small iron tools, bits of amber, a few rings of modest silver, and a row of items that looked ordinary until you noticed how many people drifted near them. Rowan's business was not only goods, it was promises. He sold objects, and he sold hope, and he sold the feeling that a person could fix their life with the right purchase. People like that feeling. People also regretted it later. By midday, the first dispute involving Rowan had gathered its audience. It did not gather loudly. It gathered the way bees gather around sweet things, quietly, quickly, with a shared understanding that this would be worth watching. A man named Gareth Clay stepped forward to the open space with 2 supporters behind him, both broad-shouldered and silent, like they had been hired by pride. Gareth was a farmer from the South Ridge, known for keeping good fences and for remembering every small promise anyone ever made him, which was an exhausting hobby. Rowan Pike stepped forward opposite him, calm and relaxed. He did not bring supporters, he brought confidence, which was cheaper and lighter. Harold wrote names, Owen lifted a hand, and the crowd settled into a hush that felt practiced. Gareth held his jaw tight, then forced his voice into a steady shape. Rowan owes me, he stated. Silver, and not a little. Rowan lifted his brows, mild surprise, polite interest. It hurts me to hear that, his expression seemed to say, while his eyes said nothing at all. Owen guided the dispute gently, because a dispute that began with money often ended with feelings. Gareth, describe the debt. Gareth described it with careful detail. Last autumn, he had sold Rowan a cartload of wool. Rowan had paid part in silver and promised the rest after winter trade. Winter trade had passed. Then another winter excuse. Then a messenger with warm words and no payment. Gareth had come to the thing because warm words did not keep sheep fed. Rowan listened, with the relaxed attention of a man listening to a story he had heard many times, He waited until Gareth finished, then gave a small nod. "I remember the wool," he said, voice calm. "Good wool. Clean. You should be proud." Gareth's eyes narrowed. "Pride does not buy grain," he replied. Rowan accepted the line with a soft smile, as if he enjoyed being corrected by someone honest. "Of course," he said. "Let us speak of what is owed." Harold's stylus paused for a breath. Harold trusted very few people who agreed too easily. Owen watched Rowan closely. "Rowan, do you dispute that you owe Gareth?" Rowan placed a hand lightly on his chest, a gesture that suggested sincerity without the burden of too much emotion. "I do not dispute that I owe him," he said. "I dispute the shape of the agreement." Gareth leaned forward, anger contained, like fire under a pot. "There was no shape," he said. "There was payment due." Rowan kept his voice gentle. "There was a choice," he explained. "Gareth offered me silver now and silver later, or silver now and goods later. I chose goods later. He did not mind at the time because he believed he would like the goods." Gareth blinked slowly, as if his memory had just been insulted. "I offered no such choice." Rowan did not look offended. He looked calm, which was worse because calm suggested control. "I believe you did," he said, "but it was a busy day and wool makes people forgetful." The crowd murmured softly, not loud enough to be a disruption, just enough to be a comment. Owen lifted a hand. The murmurs faded. "Witnesses," Owen prompted, because witnesses were the spine of this whole gentle machine. Gareth named his witness, a man named Simon Reed, no relation to Ingrid, who stepped forward with the weary posture of someone dragged into a dispute they would rather nap through. Simon confirmed the sale. He confirmed the partial silver. He did not confirm a choice about goods later, but he admitted he might not have heard every word. Rowan named his witness, a woman named Mara Finch, who had travelled with him last autumn. Mara stepped forward with calm eyes and a practical face. Mara confirmed that Gareth had discussed receiving payment in goods after winter. She described it as a friendly conversation. She described it as mutually agreeable. She described it as the sort of agreement that sounded reasonable until the winter came and people wanted certainty. Harold wrote steadily. Harold's face stayed neutral. His mind, however, was likely making a small list of what could be proved and what was only warm air. Owen leaned forward slightly. "Rowan, what goods were promised?" Rowan answered smoothly. "A set of iron tools, a sack of salt, a length of fine cloth for Gareth's wife's. A small ring as a token, not a grand ring, a modest ring, the sort that could be described as meaningful." Gareth's expression did not soften. "My wife does not need your cloth," he said. "She needs to stop hearing that I am the sort of man who can be delayed." Rowan's smile thinned, then warmed again. He was good at this. He had trained. "I hear you," he said. "I do not want you delayed. I want you satisfied." Harold shifted his slate slightly, the quiet movement of a man ready to record something unpleasant. Owen asked a calm question that placed the dispute in daylight. "Rowan, if goods were promised after winter, why have the goods not been delivered?" Rowan's eyes flicked toward the trader lane, toward his tent, toward the neat line of goods that suggested he had plenty of everything. Then he returned his gaze to Owen, and his voice stayed smooth. "Roads have been difficult," he said. "There were storms, there were delays, there were misunderstandings with a boatman." The crowd made a soft sound that meant yes, yes, boatman, of course. Gareth did not join the sound. He stared at Rowan with a steady look. "Storms do not last all winter," he said. Rowan breathed out slowly, as if releasing the weight of being a reasonable man in an unreasonable world. "You are right," he admitted. "I should have handled it better." A strange thing happened then. The crowd leaned in more. When a man like Rowan admitted fault, it felt like a performance worth watching. Owen did not react to the performance. He focused on the structure beneath it. "What does Gareth want?" Owen asked. Gareth spoke without flourish. "Silver, the rest of it, now. Not a ring, not cloth, not promises, silver." Owen turned to Rowan. "What can you pay now?" Rowan hesitated for the smallest moment. The hesitation was careful. It suggested he was measuring what would make him look generous without damaging his profits. He offered a partial amount in silver and the rest in goods. Gareth refused the goods. Rowan offered a different set of goods. Gareth refused again. Rowan offered to add a token, a little extra for the inconvenience. Gareth refused that too, as if refusing was the only dignity he had left. Owen let the exchange run just long enough to reveal the truth. Then he stepped in gently, like a hand between two people who were about to bump into each other in a narrow lane. "Here is what we will do," Owen said, voice even. "Harold, record it carefully. Rowan will pay Gareth the remaining silver in full by the end of this thing. If Rowan cannot produce the silver, Rowan will provide goods equal to that value as agreed by neutral traders, and Gareth may refuse any item that is clearly meant to be a joke. If Rowan fails to meet either condition, the debt will be spoken of openly next year, and it will follow him down every road." That last part was not a threat of force, it was something worse. It was a threat of reputation. Rowan's smile held, but the warmth faded a fraction. "Understood," he said. Gareth nodded once, satisfied and still irritated, which was the best a man could hope for. Harold wrote, stylus steady. He trapped the agreement in words like a net trapping fish. The crowd released a breath, because they had come for drama and received procedure, which was soothing in a strange way. The next dispute involving Rowan arrived before the day could relax. It came in the form of a boy leading a horse, and the horse looked like it had opinions. The boy was named Peter Wood. He was young enough to still believe adults meant what they said, and old enough to be learning that belief was a costly habit. He led the horse carefully, hand on the lead rope, gentle voice, calm touch. The horse was a shaggy brown mare with a sturdy build, the kind of animal that could carry a load and never complain out loud, which was exactly why she did complain with her eyes. Peter stepped into the open space and stopped, shoulders straight, voice quiet. "Rowan promised my father a horse," he explained. "A strong horse. A good horse. My father paid him in silver and grain. Rowan delivered this horse and he says the matter is done." Rowan stepped forward beside the trader lane edge, hands open, posture relaxed. He looked at the mare with mild affection, as if she was a friend who had been misunderstood. "She is a strong horse," he said. "She is good. She is just not dramatic about it." Peter's mouth tightened. "Rowan promised a gelding," Peter said. "He promised a calm horse fit for ploughing. This is a mare, and she is not calm. Also, she bites." The mare flicked an ear as if she had heard the accusation and found it unfair. Owen watched the mare for a moment, then watched Peter. "Your father is not here," Owen observed. Peter swallowed. "He is sick. He sent me. He said I must speak clearly and not let Rowan turn me into soup." A few people smiled softly. Peter's father had a good sense of language and a grim view of what traders did to young men. Rowan placed a hand lightly on his chest, polite sincerity again. "I would never turn anyone into soup," he said. "I sell salt." The crowd made a small warm sound that might have been laughter. Ingrid Reed, passing in the distance, did not look amused. Ingrid had heard enough jokes to know they always came with mess afterward. Owen guided the dispute back into calm steps. "Peter, what exactly was promised?" Peter repeated the promise with care. A gelding, 5 winters old, steady, calm, trained to pull. Payment made in silver and grain at the last market day. Rowan nodded. "Yes," he agreed. "That was the general shape." Peter's eyes narrowed. "General shape." Rowan spread his hands slightly. "A trader speaks in good faith," he said. "Horses are living things. A horse can be calm one day and lively the next. Also, this mare is steady in a harness. She simply expresses herself when people approach her from the wrong side." The mare shifted her weight and looked at the crowd as if hoping for better company. Owen turned his gaze to Harold. "Is there any record?" Harold's eyes flicked across his slate, then his mouth flattened. "There is a note of payment and a note of delivery," he answered. "There is no description of the animal, which is unfortunate." Peter looked stricken, as if the lack of description had reached into his chest and pinched something. Rowan looked pleased, but in a way that could still pass as sympathy. Owen did not let that sit. "Witnesses," Owen prompted. Peter named a witness, a neighbour named Elsie Marsh who had been at the market day. Elsie stepped forward, calm face, steady eyes. She confirmed the payment. She confirmed hearing Rowan speak of a gelding and a plough horse. Rowan named a witness too, and it was Mara Finch again, because Mara had become part of his public credibility. Mara stepped forward and confirmed that Rowan had said a horse, good for work, and that the word gelding had been used in the casual way people used words when they did not expect them to become evidence. Casual words were always the problem. People loved casual words right up until they needed something exact. Owen looked at the mare again. He did not reach for her, he did not test her. He simply observed her posture, her weight, her calmness under attention. Then he asked Rowan something in the same calm voice he used for everything. "Rowan, why deliver a mare if a gelding was promised?" Rowan breathed out slowly. "Because the gelding I intended to deliver went lame," he said. "Because I could not find another in time. Because this mare is strong and fit. Because I believed Peter's father needed a working animal more than he needed a certain word." Peter's hands tightened on the rope. "My father needed what he paid for," he said quietly. Rowan's smile warmed again, gentle and practiced. "He will have a working animal," Rowan replied. "That is the heart of it. The heart of it. That was how traders spoke when the bones did not match." Owen's eyes stayed on Rowan. "If you believed you were doing the right thing," Owen asked, "why did you not explain the change at delivery and offer a choice?" Rowan hesitated. The smallest pause. A pause that answered more than his words. Then he returned to his smooth voice. "I did explain," he said. Peter's father was not pleased. He accepted because he was tired and he needed the work done. "I offered to adjust the price. He refused out of pride." Peter shook his head. "He refused because you offered a small adjustment," Peter said. "A token, like a pat on the shoulder after a shove." The mare flicked her tail as if she agreed. Owen let the silence settle. Silence was a tool here. It forced people to hear themselves. Then Owen shaped the decision with the same calm firmness as before. The agreement included a specific type of horse. Rowan delivered a different type without a written adjustment. Peter's father accepted, under pressure of need. That acceptance does not erase the change. Rowan's smile faded slightly, then returned. "What do you suggest, Owen?" Owen suggested what a fair system suggested when it was trying to keep everyone sleeping at night. Rowan will provide an additional payment back to Peter's father in the form of silver or goods equal to the difference between a trained calm gelding and this mare. That difference will be judged by neutral traders chosen by Ingrid Reed, because Ingrid does not enjoy being fooled and does not accept flattery as currency. Rowan may keep the mare in the agreement if Peter's father agrees to keep her. If Peter's father refuses, Rowan will take the mare back and deliver a horse that matches the original promise within none month, witnessed and recorded. Rowan looked at Ingrid Reed in the distance, as if considering whether fate could be negotiated. Ingrid did not look back. Rowan bowed his head slightly. "Fair," he said. Peter exhaled, shoulders dropping a fraction. He had come into the open space carrying his father's frustration and his own fear. Now he carried something steadier, a plan made of words that would be recorded. Harold wrote everything down. Harold's slate was becoming a small monument to human complication. The crowd drifted away with the quiet satisfaction of having seen a trader gently pressed into accountability. It was not entertainment exactly. It was more like watching a pot stop boiling over. Later, in the trader lane, Rowan returned to his tent and did what traders did when they lost a little. He smiled at the next customer and tried to gain it back in different ways. Leif wandered past, pretending he was only passing. Rowan caught his eye. "You look thoughtful," Rowan remarked. Leif's smile was mild. "I am always thoughtful. It saves time later." Rowan chuckled softly. "Tell me what they are whispering." Leif lifted his brows. "You know what they are whispering." Rowan shrugged. "I enjoy hear it in a new order." Leif gave him a gentle look. "They are whispering that you owe everyone a little," he said. "They are whispering that you pay in smiles, and that smiles are a form of currency that never buys grain. Also, they are whispering that your witness Mara Finch is either very loyal or very tired." Rowan's smile held. "Mara is practical," he said. "Practical people are often mistaken for loyal." Leif drifted on, leaving Rowan to his goods and his calculations. In the late afternoon, a smaller issue began to rise in the camp, the kind that sounded trivial until it became personal to everyone. Harold's slate had a damp corner. It happened near the waterline. Someone had placed a wet cloak too close to Harold's records. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it was a clumsy attempt at sabotage. Maybe it was just the universe reminding Harold that paper would have been worse. Harold discovered it with the calm horror of a man watching order melt. He stared at the dampened marks. He tested them with a careful thumb. He looked up and saw several faces pretending they had not been near him. Leif happened to be nearby, because Leif happened to be near everything. "Harold," Leif offered gently, "if you glare at them like that, they will claim it is a legal injury." Harold did not look away from the damp corner. "It is a legal injury," he replied in his quiet voice. "It is an injury to my soul." Owen approached, having been alerted by the subtle shift of camp energy. He took in the slate, the dampness, the cluster of people suddenly interested in the sky. "Who was near your slate, Harold?" Harold named no one. Harold did not accuse without certainty. Harold simply did something worse. He made a public announcement. "From this point forward," he said, "all disputes will be repeated back to me after they are spoken, and all witnesses will repeat their names twice. If anyone finds it tiring, they may blame the dampness." A soft murmur moved through the crowd. It was the murmur of people realizing that a small careless act had created more work for everyone. This was how communities learned manners. Ingrid Reed walked over with the calm stride of someone who fixed problems by standing near them. "Your slate will be kept in my tent when not in use," she stated. Harold hesitated, then nodded, because Ingrid's tent was the closest thing this camp had to a fortress. "Good," Ingrid added, "and if anyone complains about repeating names, I will assign them to carry water for the rest of the thing." The murmurs stopped. Water carrying was the most effective law in any camp. At the cooking fires, the two-pot system had worked exactly as Ingrid intended. The stew stayed thicker, ingredients were measured. Anyone with the urge to improve it discovered they also had the urge to avoid explaining themselves to Ingrid. Still, the camp found new material for gossip, because gossip was a renewable resource. The whispers now were about Rowan Pike and his ability to make problems sound like misunderstandings. Some admired it, some disliked it. Some worried that they admired it, which was the most unsettling reaction of all. Edith Stone passed through the lanes once, quiet and steady. Leif noticed her glance toward Rowan's tent. It was not interest in his goods, it was interest in his habits. Widows learned to watch certain kinds of men. As evening came, Owen sat with Harold and reviewed the day, speaking low. Harold's slate lay nearby, dry now, guarded by the invisible force of Ingrid's authority. Rowan sat at his tent entrance counting, not only coins but reactions, because reactions were the true market. Gareth Clay walked past once, and Rowan dipped his head politely, as if they were old friends. Gareth did not return the gesture. That refusal was its own form of paeans. Peter Wood led the mare back to his father's tent, and spoke softly to her as he walked, which was the sort of kindness that calmed a biting animal more effectively than any rope. The camp quieted. Smoke thinned. The lake darkened into a soft mirror, and in the hush the Valley of Laws held everyone the way it held the sky, steady and patient, while traders calculated, farmers worried, and the law speaker prepared for another day of turning sharp human feelings into manageable steps. Chapter 4. The Boat Share Agreement. Rain arrived the way a cautious visitor arrives, first as a suggestion on the wind, and then as a quiet decision that settled over the valley. Canvas softened under it, rope lines darkened. The earth took on the steady smell of wet grass and patient mud, which was not unpleasant unless you had planned to stay clean. People at the Thing reacted to rain with the calm discipline of those who had suffered weather before. They adjusted cloaks, they moved firestones, they lifted cooking pots onto higher supports. They spoke about the rain as if it was a new idea, which was always a polite lie. The lanes between tents narrowed because everyone wanted to walk closer to the centre, closer to the fires, closer to any roof that could be borrowed for a moment. Those with disputes walked with a particular purpose, as if procedure would keep their boots dry. Ingrid Reed moved through the camp with her usual quiet authority. Rain did not slow her, it simply gave her more opportunities to correct people who had placed things where they should not be. A man had set his drying rack too close to the main lane. Ingrid looked at it once, then looked at the man. He moved it without being asked. This was how a peaceful camp remained peaceful. It was not fear exactly, it was recognition. Harold Ash kept his slate tucked under his cloak like a small animal that needed warmth. He moved carefully, protecting the record with the serious devotion of a man protecting the only thing separating society from endless repetition. Leaf Miller drifted along the edges of the open space, watching rain bead on cloaks, watching people pretend not to watch each other. The Thing was a place where everyone claimed to be focused on law, and everyone was also focused on who had arrived with new boots, and who was pretending the holes in their old boots were decorative. Owen Greybeard stood in the open space where the crowd gathered, rein on his shoulders, face calm. He looked like a man who had made peace with being damp for the sake of others. There was a quiet dignity in that, and also a quiet sarcasm, because dignity was often just stubbornness wearing a nice cloak. The disputes for the day began in the steady manner that had already become familiar. People stepped forward. Harold wrote names. Owen listened and shaped stories into facts. Then the boat case arrived, and the crowd leaned in, because boats were always interesting. Boats meant fish, and fish meant food, and food meant everyone had an opinion that could be expressed politely. 5 people stepped forward, and the first unusual detail was that none of them looked fully angry. They looked tired. Tired was more dangerous. Angry people exploded and were done. Tired people simmered and lasted. The group included a fisherman named Colin Shaw, a net maker named Hazel Brooke, an older man named Walter Moss, a woman named Anne Quill, and a younger man named Jasper Thorne. They stood in a rough line with the shared posture of people who had tried to solve something privately and had now admitted defeat. Behind them, a few onlookers drifted closer, faces neutral, eyes bright. This was a disagreement about a shared fishing boat, which meant it was also a disagreement about fairness, and fairness was everyone's hobby. Harold recorded their names. Owen waited until the murmurs faded. Colin Shaw stepped half a pace forward, then stopped, as if he was measuring how far he could step without becoming the villain. "We share a boat," he began, voice low and controlled. "It is a lake boat. We use it for nets and lines. We share costs and repairs. We have done this for years." Hazel Brooke made a small sound of agreement, then held back, letting Colin speak, which suggested they had discussed this and decided who would sound least emotional. Colin continued. "An oar is missing, not broken, not worn out, missing, and the schedule for use is becoming less a schedule and more a collection of bruised fiends." That last phrase drifted through the crowd. Bruised feelings were not a legal category, but they were the reason law existed. Owen inclined his head slightly, inviting the rest. Anne Quill stepped forward next. She had rain dripping from her braid, and she did not bother to wipe it away. Her eyes were steady. "The missing oar matters," she said. "We cannot safely take the boat far without it. Also, someone keeps taking the boat early, before their turn, and returning it late as if time belongs to them." Jasper Thorne shifted his weight, the movement of a man who wanted to speak and wanted not to speak. He looked at the ground, then up again. "It is not like that," he offered, voice quiet. "Fish do not wait. Weather does not wait." Hazelbrook lifted her hands a little, palms open, not aggressive, just tired. "We know fish do not wait," she said. "That is why we made a schedule, because humans do not wait either." Walter Moss cleared his throat. The sound was slow, like a door opening. "It used to be simpler," he added, "before people started counting minutes like they were coins." Harold wrote steadily. Rain tapped softly on cloaks. The camp listened like a single animal, calm and alert. Owen leaned forward slightly. "Who owns the boat?" he asked, because that was always the first question and rarely the last. Colin answered with clear practicality. "We all do. We bought it together, we share it. That is the agreement. Owen let that sit, then asked the next calm question, the one that sounded simple and peeled away excuses. Who last used the boat with both oars? Silence moved through the line. Not dramatic silence. The kind where people look slightly to the side and hope the answer appears on the ground. Anne Quill spoke first, because she seemed allergic to delay. Jasper used it the day before last, she said. He returned it with one oar and said the other was loose. Then he said it was probably in the boat. Then he said perhaps it fell out. Then he said he would look. Jasper lifted his shoulders a fraction, as if the rain had become heavy. I did look, he said. I did not find it. Hazelbrook looked at him with the polite patience reserved for people who had become predictable. Did you look carefully? She asked. Jasper spread his hands slightly, the universal gesture of a person trying to appear reasonable. I looked. I cannot produce an oar from the air. Walter Moss gave a quiet hum, half agreement, half criticism. Noah asked you to produce it from the air, he said. We asked you not to misplace it on the earth. The crowd made a soft sound that might have been laughter. Rain made everything feel quieter and closer, as if the clouds were holding the sound down. Owen did not react to the humour. He guided the dispute into the calm channel of evidence. Where was the boat taken? He asked Jasper. Jasper described a stretch along the far reed beds where fish hid and the water was shallow. He described wind, a sudden shift, a scrape against a submerged log. He described the moment he noticed the oar handle felt wrong, lighter, not catching the way it should. While he described it, the others listened with the strained patience of people who had already heard that version and were now hearing it for public record. Owen listened, then asked Hazelbrook to speak. Hazel described the schedule. 5 owners, rotating turns, first light to mid-morning to late afternoon to dusk, and then a day off for repairs when needed. A simple system, softened by neighbourly flexibility, until flexibility became a knife. Owen glanced toward Harold. Harold's slate was covered in careful words. Harold's face remained neutral, but his eyes carried the quiet message that humans would argue over anything if given enough time and a shared asset. Owen asked Anne Quill to speak, and Anne spoke about the return times, the small excuses, the feeling that she was always waiting, which was insulting in a way that felt almost personal. Owen asked Walter Moss to speak, and Walter spoke about tradition and the old way, and how it used to work when people respected one another, which was a phrase that usually meant he missed being young enough to not need a schedule. Owen asked Colin Shaw to speak again, and Colin spoke about repair costs, and how he was tired of paying for nails and tar while others arrived late and acted surprised the boat needed care. Then Owen returned to Jasper Thorne, who stood with rain on his lashes, trying to look calm and getting close. Jasper, Owen said gently, do you agree that you took the boat last with both oars? Jasper paused, then nodded once. Yes. Do you agree it returned with 1 oar? Yes. Do you agree that the shared boat is a shared responsibility? Yes. The crowd held still. Those 3 yes answers had shaped the dispute in a way that made the rest simpler. Owen's voice stayed even. Then, the missing oar is your immediate responsibility to replace or retrieve, not because you are being punished, because you were the last person holding it when it became missing. That is the only fair point we can anchor to. Jasper's face tightened, then softened again as he accepted reality. I will replace it, he said. Hazelbrook made a small nod, satisfied but still tired. Now, Owen continued, about the schedule. He looked along the line, letting each of them feel seen, which was a quiet form of pressure. A shared schedule exists to prevent suspicion, Owen said. When you take the boat early or return it late, you are not only taking time, you are taking trust, and trust is harder to repair than wood. Anne Quill's eyes softened a fraction. Walter Moss looked at the lake as if thinking about trust as a physical object. Owen turned to Harold. Read the schedule as recorded. Harold read it back in calm words, and as he read, people in the crowd nodded, because everyone enjoyed hearing rules spoken out loud. Rules were comforting when they were not aimed at you. Owen made a decision that felt boring, and therefore safe. The schedule will be followed for the rest of the Thing season. Ingrid Reed will hold the schedule board in her tent. Anyone who needs to swap will do so in daylight with another owner present. No quiet trades in the dark, no borrowing that becomes taking. Ingrid, standing nearby, inclined her head once, as if accepting a duty she already knew she would carry. Owen looked back to Jasper. "If fish do not wait, you will plan better," Owen said. "Fish have never respected human fairness. That is not an excuse for humans to abandon it." A small warm murmur moved through the crowd. It was not laughter exactly, it was relief. A decision had been made, the boat would be used, the oar would be replaced, the world would continue. Harold wrote everything down. Jasper nodded once, and in that nod was the quiet acceptance of a man who had learned that being part of a group meant being gently corrected in public. The second part of the boat dispute arrived like the aftertaste of salt. It was not about wood, it was about the first catch. Colin Shaw cleared his throat and spoke carefully, as if he knew this part was more embarrassing. "We also disagree about distribution," he admitted. "Who keeps the first catch of the day, and who shares? We have always shared some, but lately the first haul keeps becoming someone's private reward." Anne Quill's eyes narrowed slightly. Hazelbrook's mouth flattened. Walter Moss sighed as if time itself was rude. Jasper Thorne stared at the lake as if hoping fish would solve it. Owen listened, and then made the kind of suggestion that sounded obvious only after it was spoken. "You will share the first catch by tradition," Owen said. "A portion set aside for the group pot, a portion for repairs, and a portion for the owner whose turn it is. If there is disagreement about what a portion means, Harold will write down the definition in words that will haunt you." Harold lifted his slate slightly, which was as close as he came to menace. The crowd made another soft sound. People enjoyed the idea of being haunted by definitions. It made life feel orderly. With the boat dispute settled into a calm plan, the camp shifted again. Rain continued, steady and thin. The cooking fires hissed softly. People ate with the quiet satisfaction of those who had watched justice happen to someone else. In the lanes, a different kind of whisper began to spread. It was about Ingrid Reed. The whisper started with a simple complaint, the kind that could have stayed small if humans had better discipline. "Ingrid moved my tent," someone murmured. Then the complaint gained its decorative details. "Ingrid moved my tent and did not even apologize," someone added. Then it became a moral judgment. "Ingrid moved my tent because she enjoys control," someone concluded. Leif Miller heard it near the waterline and followed it the way a cat follows a warm spot. He listened without looking like he was listening. This was his best talent. The speaker was a man named Brent Hale, a cousin of someone important somewhere else, which meant he believed inconvenience was a form of disrespect. He stood with two companions and spoke in a low voice that was meant to travel. "She calls it order," Brent murmured. "I call it tyranny. Quiet tyranny, but still." Leif waited until Brent paused for breath, then stepped closer with the mild expression of a man who had simply wandered into the conversation by accident. "Tyranny is a strong word," Leif offered gently. "It usually comes with more shouting and less stew." Brent looked at Leif with mild irritation. "You have not had your tent moved," he said. Leif nodded, calm. "I have," Leif replied. "But I moved it again, and then I forgot where I put it, which is why I am careful about criticize those who can find things." One companion coughed, half laughter, half warning. Brent lowered his voice further, as if lowering it made it more correct. "She acts as if this camp is hers," he insisted. "She decides where families go, where traders go, where listeners go. She decides who stands near the fires." Leif tilted his head. "Yes," he said. "It is almost as if someone must decide, or else we will become a collection of wet arguments." Brent's mouth tightened. "Do you serve her?" Brent asked. Leif considered the question, then answered in the calm tone used for bedtime truths. "I serve my own sleep," he said. "Ingrid Reed helps me keep it." That ended the conversation for Leif, but not for Brent. Brent continued to mutter. The muttering drifted, and Ingrid Reed received it the way she received everything else, without visible surprise. Later, Ingrid walked past Brent's tent. She stopped, glanced at the rope lines, and said nothing. Brent watched her with the suspicious attention of a man waiting to be oppressed. Ingrid reached down and tightened a stake that had loosened in the rain. Then she walked on. Brent looked confused, which was a rare and educational emotion. As evening came, the rain softened to a mist. The camp quieted. The open space emptied. Harold stored his slate in Ingrid's tent as agreed, which was perhaps the most intimate trust in the entire valley. Owen sat outside his tent, cloak damp, face calm, and listened to the camp settle. He heard the soft sounds of cooking, the small murmurs of gossip, the quiet sighs of people who had been heard and people who still waited. Leif walked done last loop of the lanes, not because he needed to, but because it soothed him to see everything in place. He passed the boat owners, who spoke quietly to each other with less sharpness than before. He passed Brent Hale, who watched Ingrid from a distance with a mix of resentment and reluctant gratitude. The Valley of Laws held them all under mist and canvas, steady and patient. Chapter 5. The Land That Eats Fences. The next morning arrived without rain, which made everyone behave as if they had personally earned the clear sky. The camp smelled fresher. The lanes looked wider. Even the arguments seemed slightly cleaner, though only slightly. People moved with the calm purpose that came after several days of procedure. They knew where to stand. They knew when to speak. They knew that Harold Ash would trap their words on slate, and that those words would return to haunt them if they tried to wriggle away. The valley itself looked peaceful, and that was how it tricked people. The lake reflected the sky. The hills sat like sleeping animals. The grass moved gently in the breeze as if it had never caused a dispute in its life. Grass, of course, was innocent in the way a knife was innocent. It did not choose how it was used. Humans chose, and humans were the problem. Leif Miller wandered near the open space as Owen began the day. Harold stood ready. Ingrid moved at the edge of the crowd, already watching rope lines and fire spacing with the quiet suspicion of someone who trusted nothing that could catch flame. Rowan Pike stood in the trader lane, smiling at customers, and occasionally glancing toward the open space as if counting how many people looked in his direction. Traders were like that. They measured attention the way farmers measured rain. Edith Stone passed once, quiet and steady. She looked less tired than before, which was not happiness exactly, but it was progress. The thing did not cure grief, it simply gave grief a file and a plan. The first disputes of the day moved smoothly, almost boringly, which was a blessing. Then Cedric North returned, and the camp leaned in, because Cedric had the energy of a man who believed land had personally wronged him. Cedric stepped forward with a new complaint, and he brought a length of cord, 2 stakes, and a small bundle of dried grass. The dried grass was the kind of evidence that looked ridiculous until you realized it might matter. Behind him stood a neighbor named Martin Fenn, and beside Martin stood an older woman named Della Crow, who walked with a staff and a steady expression. Della was one of the elders, the kind of person who had seen so many disputes that her patience had become a force of nature. Across from Cedric stood a man named Owen did not need to guess. It was Cedric's other neighbor, Harlan Beck, a quiet farmer with a face that looked calm even when his eyes were sharp. Harlan had the posture of someone who would prefer to be anywhere else, but had come because land did not allow preferences. Harold wrote the names. Owen waited until the crowd settled. Cedric began with a statement that sounded as if it had been polished. "The land is eating my fence," he said. A soft murmur moved through the crowd. Land-eating fences was a phrase that sounded like a story, and also like a genuine problem. Cedric continued, holding up the dried grass. "This is the grass from the strip between my meadow and Harlan's. The strip keeps widening. Every season the line shifts. My fence posts lean, my ditch fills, my boundary becomes a suggestion." Harlan Beck's mouth tightened, not into anger, into restraint. "The strip is not widening," he said quietly. "Cedric is moving his fence." Cedric inhaled slowly. He looked toward Owen with the controlled indignation of a man presenting a spiritual injury. "Listen to this," he said, as if the crowd had not already been listening. Owen lifted a hand slightly, not to silence Cedric, but to invite calm. "Cedric," Owen said, "describe the boundary as it was agreed." Cedric described an old boundary ditch and a hedge line that had existed for years. He spoke of stones, of posts, of how his father had shown him the line. He spoke of it with the reverence of a man speaking about something sacred which was common with grass. Harlan described the same line, but with a different emphasis. The ditch was there. The hedge was there. The problem, in his view, was that Cedric believed a ditch could be owned in the same way a person owned a pot. Leif watched them and felt the familiar comfort of listening to adults argue about Earth with deep seriousness. It was soothing, in a strange way, because it was so predictable. Humans did not change, they simply rotated their complaints. Owen asked the obvious question, the one that always made everyone uncomfortable. "Have you walked the line with witnesses?" Cedric nodded quickly. "Yes, last autumn, then again this spring." Harlan nodded more slowly. "We walked it." Cedric argued while we walked it. Owen glanced at Harold. "Any record?" Harold checked his slate and nodded. "There is a record of a walk last autumn," he said. "There is a note of disagreement about the ditch edge, but no final adjustment." Owen considered that with the calm weight of someone who knew what it meant. It meant they had postponed the real decision. Now the postponed decision had grown larger, like all postponed things. Owen invited witnesses forward. Cedric's witness was Martin Fenn, who confirmed that the fence posts were leaning and that the ditch seemed to have shifted, though he admitted he was not skilled at telling whether the earth moved or whether humans moved things on the earth. Harlan's witness was Della Crow, the older woman with the staff. Della stepped forward and looked at both men like a teacher looking at two children who had invented a new way to be annoying. Della spoke in a steady voice, and when she spoke, the crowd quieted more fully, because elders carried a different kind of authority. It was the authority of having outlasted everyone else's drama. "The ditch has not moved," Della stated. "The hedge has not moved. The earth has done what earth does. It settles. It softens. It swells in wet seasons and tightens in dry ones. Fences lean if you do not set them properly, and if you want to claim the earth is eating your fence, you should first try setting your posts deeper." Cedric's face tightened. He wanted to argue with Della, but he also wanted to survive the social consequences of arguing with Della. He chose a careful approach. "With respect, Della," he began. Della lifted her hand slightly. "Respect is best shown by silence," she said, and then continued without raising her voice. "Cedric's fence has been placed too close to the ditch edge. When the ditch softens, the posts lean. Cedric then moves the posts back and calls it proof. Harlan then moves nothing and becomes the villain anyway. The land is not eating the fence. Cedric is building on a place that wants to slide." The crowd made a low sound of satisfaction. This was why they loved elders. Elders reduced confusion into simple shame. Cedric swallowed. Harlan's shoulders lowered slightly, as if a weight had been lifted. Owen let Della's words settle. Then he guided the dispute into a solution that would not require anyone to admit full wrongdoing, because admissions were rare and sleep was the goal. "Here is what we will do," Owen said, voice even. "We will mark the boundary line at a stable point, not at the ditch edge that shifts with weather. Harold will record the measure from the old hedge stump and the stone at the north bend. Cedric will set his fence posts at a safe distance from the ditch, as Della has advised. Harlan will maintain the ditch as agreed, and both will share labour for the hedge repairs, because the hedge has suffered from being treated like a witness," Harold wrote. Della nodded once, satisfied. Martin Fenn looked relieved, because he had not enjoyed being a human measuring stick. Cedric looked annoyed, but he also looked slightly calmer because the decision gave him something to do that was not accusing his neighbour. Harlan looked calm, which was his natural shape. The crowd began to drift, but Owen lifted a hand again, because the dispute had a second part, and the second part was even more human. "Cedric," Owen asked, "what is this bundle of grass?" Cedric held it up again as if daring the world to laugh. "It is the grass from the strip," he said. "It grows differently, thicker, greener, as if the land knows it is being stolen and is trying to make itself attractive." A soft ripple moved through the crowd. Some people smiled, some people looked thoughtful, because humans could turn anything into a sign. Owen's eyes softened. "Grass grows differently where water settles," he said. "Ditches hold water, your fence leans toward the ditch, the earth is moist there. Moist earth grows lush grass. It is not a moral statement, it is a damper." A small warm murmur moved through the crowd. Cedric's shoulders rose and fell in a breath that sounded like defeat. Della Crow tapped her staff once, a gentle punctuation. "Stop listening to grass," she advised. "It has too much time to think." The crowd drifted away more fully now, carrying the comfort of a dispute settled by weather logic and elder sarcasm. But the day was not finished. A second dispute rose from the same area of land, because once a piece of earth became interesting, it remained interesting. This up was about a ditch and a hedge, but it was also about inheritance, which meant it was about pride and memory. A woman named Nora Fenn stepped forward, the same neighbour who had supported Edith Stone earlier. Nora carried herself with steady confidence. Across from her stood a man named Ellis Pike, no relation to Rowan, though Rowan looked mildly offended by the lack of connection. Nora's claim was simple. The hedge line between their plots had been cut back too far. The hedge had been shared. Now it looked like Ellis had taken more than his share of the hedge, which was a sentence nobody expected to say in their youth. Ellis Pike insisted he had only trimmed it for health. He said the hedge would grow better. He said Nora was imagining theft where there was only gardening. Harold wrote. Owen listened. Ingrid, passing nearby, slowed slightly, because even she appreciated a dispute about boundaries that did not involve carts. Witnesses were called. One witness was an elderly man named Edwin Garth, who was famous for hearing poorly and remembering selectively. Edwin stepped forward, squinting as if the open space was trying to trick him. Owen asked Edwin what he had seen. Edwin leaned forward, hand cupped to his ear, then straightened as if he had made a decision. "I saw Ellis with a knife by the hedge," Edwin said. A small ripple moved through the crowd. Knife was not a forbidden word, but it carried too much edge. Owen did not react. He simply guided. "Ripple? Cutting tool?" Owen corrected softly, and Edwin nodded as if that was what he had meant all along. Edwin continued. "He was trimming," he said, "or cutting, or improving. Hard to say. I do not trust improvement. Improvement is often just taking." Ellis Pike exhaled slowly. "I trimmed it back because it was choking itself," he insisted. "I was helping." Nora Fenn's eyes remained steady. "You trimmed it back on your side and on my side," she said. "You helped yourself." Owen listened and then asked a question that was calm and deeply irritating to anyone hoping to avoid detail. "How far back was it trimmed, and where is the cut wood now?" Ellis hesitated. Nora did not. "The cut wood is stacked behind Ellis's shed," Nora said. "Neatly, like a person saving something." Ellis lifted his hand slightly. "It is hedgewood. It burns. Everyone saves it." Owen glanced toward Ingrid. "Ingrid," he said, "would you send someone to observe the stack and report whether it matches a shared trimming or a private harvest?" Ingrid inclined her head once and moved a young runner with a gesture. The runner left quickly, returning a few minutes later, damp boots, serious expression. "The stack is large," the runner reported. "It is more than trimming. It looks like a person planned for winter." A soft murmur moved through the crowd. Winter planning was respectable. Winter planning at someone else's expense was less respectable. Owen offered a decision that allowed Ellis to keep dignity while returning fairness. "The hedge is shared. Trimming may be done for health, but only by agreement, and only evenly. Ellis will return half the cut wood to Nora. Ellis will also provide labour to replant and thicken the hedge line on Nora's side, because a hedge is a living boundary, not a pile of fuel." Ellis Pike nodded stiffly. Nora Fenn nodded calmly. Edwin Garth looked pleased, because he enjoyed being correct even when he was only partly sure what he had heard. As the crowd drifted again, Leif Miller noticed a different whisper moving through the lanes. This one was not about land, it was about people. A secret engagement. In a camp like this, an engagement was never just an engagement. It was property, alliances, future arguments, and the right to sit near certain fires. It was also the sweetest kind of gossip, because it had the flavour of romance without the risk of being blamed for it. Leif heard it first near the water line, where young people pretended to fetch water while actually fetching information. Hazelbrook is promised to Jasper Thorn, someone murmured. Leif listened, mild face, alert mind. That cannot be true, another murmured. Hazel would never. That is why it is true, the first murmured. Quiet people do things quietly. Leif followed the whisper toward the trader lane, where gossip always went to be priced. Rowan Pike was speaking to a customer, but his eyes flicked toward Leif with the quick awareness of a man who could smell a rumour. Leif did not stop. He drifted past, letting Rowan hear only fragments. Hazel, Jasper, promised, quiet. Rowan's smile deepened slightly. He enjoyed human complication almost as much as profits. The rumour moved fast. It reached Anne Quill. It reached Colin Shaw. It reached Walter Moss, who claimed to be too old for romance and then listened harder than anyone. It even reached Ingrid Reed, because nothing could avoid Ingrid for long. Ingrid heard it near the cooking fires and made no comment. That was her comment. By late afternoon, Hazelbrook and Jasper Thorn found themselves standing too close together near the boat lane, both looking as if the air had become awkward. Hazel's face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. Jasper looked as if he would rather face a missing oar again. Leif watched from a respectful distance. He did not need to be close. Gossip carried. Hazel spoke first, voice low. "We are not promised," she said. Jasper nodded quickly. "We are not." Hazel looked at him with polite suspicion. "Then why is everyone behaving as if we are?" Jasper stared at the ground for a moment, then up again. "Because we spoke for a long time last night," he admitted. "About the boat, about fairness, about how people cannot follow schedules." Hazel's mouth tightened slightly. "A dangerous conversation," she said. "People might think we are compatible." Jasper's face warmed a fraction, then steadied. "We are compatible in none way," he said. "We both dislike nonsense." Hazel considered that and seemed annoyed by the truth of it. Leif walked on, satisfied. The rumour would now change shape. It would become Hazel and Jasper are not promised, but they spoke for a long time, which was even better gossip because it invited speculation without closure. As evening came, the camp settled again. The sky stayed clear, fires burned steadier, the cooking pots smelled thicker, because Ingrid's two-pot system had held. No had dared to improve the stew without permission. Harold stored his slate safely. Owen reviewed the day with the tired calm of a man who had turned several sharp disputes into manageable chores. Cedric North walked back toward his tent with a cord and a plan to set his fence posts deeper, which might have been the closest he would ever come to personal growth. Harlan Beck walked beside him for a short stretch in silence, and the silence was not friendly, but it was less hostile, which counted as peace. In the lanes, the rumour of the engagement continued to drift, softer now, like smoke at the end of a fire. It did not need to be true to be useful. It simply needed to be shared. The Valley of Laws held all of it. The grass, the fences, the hedges, the whispered promises, and the steady work of people trying to live beside one another without losing their minds. Chapter 6. The Quiet Insult Case. The sixth day of the thing began with a calm morning that felt almost suspicious. The lake lay smooth, the air was mild. The camp moved with practiced habits. Even the dogs seemed quieter, as if they had decided to conserve energy for later trouble. A calm morning in a camp full of disputes was like a polite smile from someone you did not trust. It was pleasant. It was also a warning. Harold Ash arrived early at the open space with his slate dry and his cord neatly coiled. He looked like a man who had survived several days of human complication and had come back for more. His face remained neutral, but his eyes carried the quiet determination of someone who would rather be asleep and would settle for accuracy. Owen Greybeard spoke a few opening reminders in the same steady tone he used for everything. Speak in turn, speak clearly, leave your fists inside your sleeves and your anger inside your facts. People nodded, grateful to be reminded that they were civilized. Civilization was comforting as long as it did not cost too much. Ingrid Reed passed once through the edge of the crowd, checking that the lanes remained clear. The camp ran on her calm decisions the way a boat ran on oars. Nobody thanked her for it out loud. They simply benefited. Leif Miller drifted near the back of the crowd, not because he was avoiding the law, but because the best details always floated at the edges. He listened to murmurs about Rowan Pike's debts, about Edith Stone's calm strength, about Cedric North and his grass philosophy, and about Hazelbrook and Jasper Thorne, who were not promised, but also were definitely not promised in a way that sounded complicated. Then the insult case arrived. It came in softly, as insults often did, not a shouted slur in a crowded lane, not a dramatic accusation across the open space. It came as a quiet statement that had been spoken in passing, the kind that could be denied, and the kind that stayed in the mind because it had been said as if it was ordinary truth. A man named Thomas Ketch stepped forward. He was middle-aged, broad-shouldered, and dressed plainly. His face held the calm tension of someone who had been wounded and had decided not to show blood. Behind him stood his brother, Eli Ketch, who looked ready to make the situation worse with enthusiasm. Opposite them stood a man named Bernard Holt. Bernard's cloak was better than Thomas's cloak. Bernard's boots were newer. Bernard's smile was polite in the way that made it feel like a barrier. He stood with a supporter named Seth Lark, a thin man with a narrow face who watched everything like it was entertainment. Harold wrote names. Owen waited. The open space quieted, because everyone knew insult disputes were never just about words. They were about status, and status was always expensive. Thomas began without flourish. Bernard Holt spoke of me in a way that injures my name. Bernard's polite smile remained. He did not look surprised. He looked prepared, which meant he had already arranged his denial in a neat package. Owen guided the start gently. Thomas, describe what was said and where. Thomas swallowed, then spoke steadily. At the waterline 2 nights ago, Bernard spoke to Seth. I was nearby. Bernard said I was the sort of man who counts other people's balls. He said it softly, but he said it with certainty. He implied I take more than my share when food is served. A soft murmur moved through the crowd. Bowl counting had become a camp scandal already. It was a phrase that carried accusation and social poison in nan neat bundle. Bernard's brows lifted in mild surprise, like a man hearing a story he could not possibly be part of. Owen's gaze moved to Bernard, steady. Bernard, do you deny speaking those words? Bernard answered smoothly, voice calm. I deny insulting Thomas. I may have spoken of bowl counting in general. It is a humorous topic in camp, but I did not name him. If he took it to heart, that is unfortunate. Thomas's brother Eli made a small, harsh sound. Thomas touched Eli's arm once, a quiet warning to remain inside the rules. Owen watched that gesture and then continued with calm steps. Witnesses, Thomas named Eli, who had heard the words and had been ready to respond at once, which Thomas had prevented. Thomas also named a woman named Nora Fenn, who had been walking back from the water with a bucket and had heard more than she wanted. Bernard named Seth Lark, which was expected. Seth looked mildly pleased to be involved, which was also expected. Harold recorded all of it, stylus steady, face neutral, soul likely tired. Owen called Nora Fenn first because Nora had already proven she could speak calmly under pressure. Nora stepped forward and described what she had heard. Bernard had spoken to Seth. Bernard had used Thomas's name. Bernard had spoken softly. Bernard had said Thomas counted bowls and watched portions like a hawk. Bernard had added that such men were useful in winter because they always knew who had eaten too much. The crowd made a low sound that was half amusement and half disapproval. Humour was welcome. Accusations disguised as humour were less welcome. Bernard's smile stayed, but it tightened. Owen turned to Seth Lark. Seth stepped forward with the posture of someone about to polish a lie until it shone. Seth admitted Bernard had mentioned bowl counting. Seth insisted it had not been meant as an insult. Seth described it as friendly teasing, the sort friends did. Seth also described Thomas as overly sensitive, which was an interesting choice for a witness to make in public. Owen's gaze stayed steady on Seth. Are you friends with Thomas? Seth hesitated, not closely. Then describe how you know what friends do with him. Seth's narrow face warmed slightly, then cooled again as he realized he had stepped into a hole. "I meant in general," he adjusted. Owen let that adjustment sit. Adjustments were revealing. Then Owen called Eli Ketch, who spoke in a controlled voice that sounded like anger kept behind a fence. Eli repeated the words as he had heard them, and he repeated the tone too, the soft certainty that made the insult feel deliberate. Eli also admitted he had wanted to confront Bernard immediately and that Thomas had stopped him because Thomas believed the thing was the right place. The crowd murmured softly, pleased with Thomas's restraint. Restraint was admired because it was difficult and because it suggested a person had faith in the system. Owen returned to Bernard Holt. Bernard's polite smile was now thinner, like stew that had been improved by someone with too much water. "Bernard," Owen asked, "do you consider this statement harmless?" Bernard breathed out slowly, as if the world had become unreasonable. "It was a joke," he insisted. "Camp jokes exist to keep tension low." Thomas's voice remained steady. "A joke that stains my name is not a joke," he said quietly. "It is a warning dressed as laughter." Owen nodded slightly, and the nod carried the quiet message that he had heard this kind of thing before. Then Owen did something that made the insult case feel almost gentle. He explained the harm in calm words, as if teaching children how to behave. "In a camp," Owen said, "reputation is food. If you claim a man takes more than his share, you claim he threatens the community. Even if you speak softly, the claim travels. The softness does not make it kinder. It makes it harder to answer." Bernard's eyes flicked away for a moment. He returned them quickly, as if the flick had never happened. Owen offered Bernard a path out that did not require drama. This was one of Owen's best skills. He offered people a way to correct themselves without being destroyed, because a destroyed person rarely slept, and sleeplessness spread. "You will withdraw the statement publicly," Owen decided. "Not with mockery, not with another joke. You will state clearly that you spoke without care. You will say Thomas Ketch has taken no more than his share in this camp. You will also provide a small compensation, not because words have a price, but because harm requires repair. A share of salt or a measure of grain will do." Harold wrote the terms. The crowd made a soft approving sound. This was the kind of justice people enjoyed. It was tidy, it was social. It did not require anyone to be unalived. Bernard's smile returned, but it looked like a mask that had become heavy. He nodded once. "I will withdraw it," he said. Thomas bowed his head slightly, accepting the decision without triumph. Triumph would have made the dispute feel less calm. Owen concluded the case with a reminder that felt like a lullaby for adults. "Speak carefully. The camp hears everything, even when you whisper." The insult dispute ended and the open space relaxed. People drifted away, murmuring about Bernard Holt's thin smile and about Thomas Ketch's calm restraint. Someone whispered that bowl counting was now officially a legal hazard. Someone else whispered that it always had been. In the afternoon, a song was performed near the fires. This was not a scheduled event, it was simply what happened when people grew tired of procedures and wanted to feel human again. A young man named Colin Shaw sang, which surprised everyone because Colin usually used his voice only for fish and complaints. The song was simple, about nets and wind and the way the lake looked at night. It was gentle enough to soothe. It was also specific enough that some listeners believed it was about them. A woman named Anne Quill listened with narrowed eyes. She told herself she was appreciating the melody. She also told herself the line about a steady hand that always arrives late was not aimed at her. Walter Moss listened and nodded along. He told himself the line about old men who miss the past was respectful. He also told himself Colin was not calling him a moss-covered stump. Hazelbrook listened quietly. Jasper Thorne listened too, and the rumour engine in the camp adjusted itself again, because two people listening at the same fire was apparently evidence of fate. Leaf watched this all with mild amusement and felt the particular comfort of soft tension that never quite became conflict. The camp was learning. The camp was also gossiping, because learning and gossiping were often the same process with different clothing. As evening came, Bernard Holt stood near the open space and withdrew his statement as ordered. He did it with the forced calm of a man swallowing something bitter. He spoke clearly, so Harold could record it and so the camp could hear. "Thomas Ketch has taken no more than his share. I spoke without care." He handed over a small pouch of salt to Thomas, and Thomas accepted it without expression. Then Bernard walked away with his boots still new and his pride slightly scuffed, which was the correct amount of scuff for the system to work. The camp settled, fires softened. Owen reviewed the next day's list with Harold. Ingrid made one last pass through the lanes. Leif watched the lake darken and thought, not unkindly, that humans were exhausting, but at least they had invented procedure. Chapter 7. The Missing Sheep and the Helpful Truth. The seventh day began with a different kind of energy, the kind that belonged to practical losses. Land disputes bruised pride, debt disputes bruised trust. A missing animal bruised the stomach, because it reminded everyone that food did not arrive by agreement alone. The camp woke to whispers that travelled faster than the smoke. A sheep is missing. Not a stray chicken. Not a misplaced pot. A sheep. Proper value. Proper worry. Leif Miller heard it before he reached the cooking fires, which was normal. Gossip always reached Leif first, as if the wind thought he was its favourite listener. Near the edge of camp, a shepherd named Colin Wren stood with his hands on his hips, staring at the ground as if the ground had hidden something in a pocket. Colin Wren was young enough to still feel shame loudly, and old enough to know shame did not fix a problem. Beside him stood a girl of about 10 winters named Mary Wren, his niece, with a quiet face and bright eyes. She held a scrap of rope in one hand, not because it was evidence, but because children held things when they were nervous. A small cluster of people had gathered, calm but alert. Missing animals made everyone feel involved. Even those who did not own sheep imagined their own things going missing, and imagination was powerful. Ingrid Reed moved through the cluster once, calm as ever. "Bring this to the open space," she instructed. "If it stays in the lanes, it becomes a story. If it enters the open space, it becomes a case." Harold Ash arrived with his slate, looking slightly offended that the morning had begun without his permission. Owen Greybeard followed, and the crowd shifted into the familiar shape of listening. Colin Wren stepped forward. His voice was low and controlled, but the worry inside it was obvious. "One of my sheep is missing. It was tied near my tent last night. The rope was cut or slipped. I found this end here." He held up the rope end. It was frayed, not cleanly cut. That detail mattered in a camp where everyone knew the difference between an accident and a decision. Owen's gaze rested on the rope, then on Colin. "When did you last see the sheep?" Colin answered carefully. "Just after dusk." Then he went to sleep. In the night he heard nothing unusual, which meant either nothing happened or he was tired enough to miss it. Owen asked the next calm questions, the questions that made a mystery smaller. "How many sheep do you have?" 3. "Are the others present?" "Yes." "Any sign of struggle?" "No. No blood, no dragged marks, no panic in the others." The crowd made a soft murmur. Sheep panic was memorable. The lack of it suggested the sheep had left calmly, or been led calmly, or wandered calmly, which was not impossible. Sheep were skilled at wandering with quiet confidence. Colin swallowed. "I believe someone took it." That sentence landed softly and did not bounce. In a camp like this, theft was rare, but hunger and opportunity were common. Owen did not react with outrage. He reacted with calm procedure, which was why he had been chosen to speak law instead of simply being a person with opinions. "Witnesses," Owen prompted. Colin named 2. Mary Wren, who had been nearby at dusk, and a man named Stephen Hale who had camped near Colin's tent. Stephen stepped forward with the sleepy face of someone who had been asked to remember the night in detail, which was rude. Mary stepped forward too, and the crowd quieted more than usual, because children were strange witnesses. They saw everything, and interpreted it with a mind that had not yet learned how adults wanted truth shaped. Owen's voice softened slightly, because Owen knew children did not respond well to pressure. "Mary," he invited, "tell the thing what you saw." Mary looked at the rope end, then looked at Owen, then looked at the crowd. Her eyes moved across faces as if she was counting them for safety. "I saw Uncle Colin tie the sheep," she said. "It was the one with the black spot by its ear." "It chews like it is angry." A small warm murmur moved through the crowd. People liked details. Details made the sheep real. Then Mary continued. "Later I saw a man near the rope." Colin's shoulders rose slightly. The crowd leaned in without moving. Owen kept his voice calm. "Which man?" Mary hesitated, thinking. She did not rush. She had not learned the adult habit of filling silence. "He had tidy feet," she said. The crowd made a soft sound, half confusion, half interest. Owen blinked once. Tidy feet. Mary nodded as if this was obvious. "His boots were clean," she explained. "Not like shepherd boots, like trader boots, or like someone who does not step in the bad mud." Several heads in the crowd turned, almost without thinking, toward the trader lane. Rowan Pike was there, of course. Rowan Pike's boots were clean. Rowan Pike's boots were practically Phaon's. Leif felt the rumour engine spark like dry grass catching fire. Owen's expression remained steady, but his eyes shifted toward Rowan's lane for a moment, then returned to Mary. "Did you see the sheep leave?" Mary nodded. The man held the rope and the sheep walked after him. The sheep did not fight. The sheep likes people who hold food. Colin Wren's mouth tightened. "Did you see the man's face?" Mary considered that, brows gently knit. "I saw his nose," she said, which was a child's way of saying she had not seen enough. Owen accepted the limitation without pushing, because pushing children often created stories instead of facts. He turned to Stefan Hale. "Stefan, what did you hear or see?" Stefan admitted he had heard nothing, but he had seen someone walking toward the trader lane late, carrying something over a shoulder. He had assumed it was firewood, because it was better for sleep to assume it was firewood. Owen nodded. Sleep made people generous with assumptions. Then Owen did something calm and sharp. He invited Rowan Pike forward, not as an accusation, but as a question in daylight. Rowan stepped into the open space with the same relaxed posture he used for customers, as if he was arriving to sell a solution. His boots were, as promised by the rumour, tidy. He looked at the rope end with mild interest, then at Colin Wren with warm sympathy. "Unfortunate," he said softly. "Sheep have a talent for wandering." Colin's voice stayed controlled, but the words carried a tight edge. "My sheep did not wander. A person led it." Rowan lifted his brows slightly, polite surprise. "A claim," he replied, still calm. "Do you have more than worry?" Owen guided the exchange into calm steps. "Rowan, were you near Colin Wren's tent after dusk last night?" Rowan answered smoothly. "I walked the lanes, I spoke with a customer, I checked my goods, I slept." Owen kept the question simple. "Did you lead a sheep?" Rowan gave a small soft laugh. "No." Owen did not react to the laugh. He simply continued. "Did anyone with tidy boots travel with you last night?" Rowan's smile held, but his eyes tightened for a moment. It was a moment that could be explained in many ways. Surprise, irritation, calculation. "Many people have tidy boots," Rowan replied, "especially those who enjoy tidiness." The crowd made a soft murmur. The murmur was not supportive, it was curious. Owen turned back to Mary, voice gentle again. "Mary, was the man Rowan piked?" Mary stared at Rowan with serious concentration, like she was trying to remember a dream. "His boots are like that," she said carefully, "but his nose might be different, or it might be the same. Grown men have a lot of noses." A few people smiled softly. Even Owen's mouth shifted slightly toward warmth, then returned to calm. Owen did not accuse Rowan. Accusations without proof were how camps turned into fights. Owen instead did what Law did best. He widened the net. "We will treat this as a missing animal," Owen stated, "not as a theft proven. Yet." He turned to Ingrid. "Ingrid, assign 2 trusted runners to walk the lanes and the trader spaces. Look for signs of a sheep, look for fresh wool, look for bones, look for a sudden increase in stew quality." The crowd made a low, warm sound. The stew had become a moral symbol, and now it was evidence too. Ingrid inclined her head and moved immediately, because Ingrid believed in solving problems quickly so she did not have to listen to them later. Owen continued. "Colin Wren, Keep your remaining sheep closer and tie them with a rope that does not fray when pulled. If anyone sees a sheep with a black spot near its ear, they bring it here. If anyone has information, they may offer it without fear of being accused, as long as they offer it truthfully." Harold wrote it down. The crowd drifted, but not far. A missing sheep pulled attention like a hook. Leaf moved through the camp with careful ease, listening to whispers as they formed. Some whispered it was Rowan Pike, because Rowan was always the easiest story. Some whispered it was a hungry family, because hunger was the second easiest story. Some whispered it was a wolf, because wolves were a story everyone liked, even when the tracks did not match. That wolf story arrived quickly. A shepherd from another lane claimed he had heard a howl near the far reeds. He spoke with certainty, because certainty made a person feel useful. Colin Wren wanted to believe it, because believing in wolves meant not believing in neighbours. But then the tracks were examined. Ingrid's runners returned with serious faces. No blood, they reported, no fur scattered, no dragged marks. There are tracks, but they are not wolf tracks, they are human, and they are tidy. That word tidy moved through the camp like wind through grass. Owen called for calm again and kept the tone soft. "We do not hunt people," he reminded them. "We do not create chaos. We follow steps." Then the helpful truth arrived, and it arrived from the least expected place. A boy named Peter Wood stepped forward. The same boy from the horse dispute, quiet voice, careful posture. He looked nervous, but not guilty, more like he was holding a truth that felt heavy. Owen turned his gaze to him. "Peter, what do you bring?" Peter swallowed. "I saw a sheep," he admitted, "last night, near Rowan Pike's tent." A collective inhale moved through the crowd. Rowan's smile stayed in place, but it had become very still. Peter continued, and his honesty sounded like a person walking carefully across thin ice. "I was delivering a message from my father to someone in the trader lane. I saw a man lead the sheep behind Rowan's tent. The man was not Rowan. The man was Brent Hayard." Leaf felt the entire camp shift. Names were fuel. Brent Hale had already been muttering about Ingrid's tyranny. Now Brent Hale had a sheep attached to his name like a burr. Rowan's eyes flicked toward the lane where Brent's tent stood, then returned to calm, as if he did not want to look too involved. Owen's voice remained even. "Peter, are you certain?" Peter nodded quickly. "Yes. Brent's boots are clean, but not as clean as Rowan's. Brent walks like he thinks the earth should move aside for him." I recognized him. The crowd released a low murmur. It was the murmur of recognition and of something close to satisfaction. It was easier to blame Brent than Rowan. Rowan was slippery. Brent was loud. Owen turned to Ingrid, who had arrived at the edge of the open space already, because Ingrid could smell trouble like smoke. "Bring Brent Hale," Owen instructed. Ingrid did not move herself. She gestured, and two men from her camp organization circle went to fetch Brent. They returned with Brent a few minutes later, and Brent looked outraged at being interrupted, which was always a poor start. Brent stepped into the open space with his chin raised. "This is ridiculous," he began, voice controlled but sharp. "I am being treated as if I have done something wrong." Owen's tone stayed calm. "We are treating you as if we have questions." Brent's eyes darted across the crowd, searching for support. Some faces looked curious, some looked disapproving. Nobody looked eager to defend him. Owen asked the question again, simple and direct. "Were you near Colin Wren's sheep last night?" Brent hesitated, then answered. "I walked the lanes. I could have been near any tent. That is how camps worked." Owen nodded, as if agreeing that camps were inconvenient. "Did you lead a sheep behind Rowan Pike's tent?" Brent's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, as if his story was trying to decide what shape would fit. "No," he said. Peter Wood stood very still, watching. Mary Wren watched too, bright eyes, serious face. Children noticed when adults lied. Adults noticed too, but they pretended not to. Owen did not accuse. He offered steps. "Ingrid," he said, "search behind Rowan Pike's tent and behind Brent Hale's tent. Do so with neutral witnesses." Ingrid nodded once. She chose witnesses who looked boring, which was always the best choice. They walked to the trader lane. The crowd followed at a respectful distance. because nothing made people walk faster than the promise of evidence. Behind Rowan's tent, the ground was slightly disturbed. There were hoof marks, there were small droppings. There was also a faint smear of wool caught on a stake. Rowan's expression stayed calm. He looked mildly offended that the earth was messy behind his tent. Behind Brent's tent, the search found the sheep. The sheep stood tied to a rope, chewing calmly. Black spot near the ear, looking as if it had simply relocated to a new buffet. It did not look traumatized. It looked satisfied. Colin Wren exhaled a breath that sounded like relief and anger mixed together, the way soup mixed salt and water. Brent Hale stared at the sheep like the sheep had betrayed him. "This is not what it looks like," he began. Leif, standing near the back, thought that this sentence had been spoken by every guilty person since the first stolen turnip. Owen remained calm, which made Brent's panic look louder by contrast. "Then explain what it is." Brent's eyes flicked toward the crowd. He attempted a smile. It failed. "I was helping," he said. "The sheep was loose. I found it wandering. I tied it so it would not be lost. I planned to return it in the morning." Colin Wren's voice stayed controlled, but the words were sharp. "Then why was my rope frayed? Why was the sheep led behind Rowan's tent? Why not bring it to me?" Brent lifted his hands, palms open, the gesture of someone begging to be understood. "I did not want to wake you," he insisted. "I did not want to disturb you. Also, your tent is far from mine." Ingrid Reed stepped forward, calm as winter. "Your tent is not far," she stated. "It is 2 lanes away." Brent's face warmed. "Then why was it behind Rowan's tent?" Colin asked again. Brent glanced at Rowan, and Rowan's calm face made Brent look more desperate. "I did not want people to think it was mine," Brent blurted. "If it was near Rowan, people would assume it belonged to him. People assume many things about Rowan." Rowan's smile returned, mild and warm, the smile of a man who enjoyed being used as a shield. "They do," he murmured. Owen lifted a hand, quieting the murmurs that threatened to swell. "Brent Hale," Owen stated, "you took a sheep and you hid it. Even if you believed you were helping, you chose secrecy. Secrecy is what makes help look like taking." Brent tried to protest, but Owen continued, gentle and firm. "You will return the sheep at once, of course. You will also provide compensation to Colin Wren for the fear and the time spent searching. A measure of grain or a day of labour, recorded and witnessed, and you will apologise publicly, not because apologies fix everything, but because they set a boundary around future behaviour." Harold wrote it down. The crowd released a breath. Relief. Satisfaction. A clean ending. The sheep chewed, unconcerned. Brent's posture slumped slightly. He nodded, because there was nothing else to do. Colin Wren took the rope and led the sheep back toward his tent, murmuring to it as if it had been a foolish child. Mary Wren walked beside him, calm again now that the world made sense. As the crowd drifted back, the camp spoke softly about helpfulness, and how it sometimes wore the mask of theft. People also spoke softly about Brent Hale's habit of calling Ingrid a tyrant while borrowing the camp's peace for his own comfort. By evening, the camp had a new lesson to soothe itself with. Evidence mattered. Procedure mattered. Even missing sheep could be found without turning the camp into a hunt. Owen sat by his tent as the lake darkened again, feeling the quiet satisfaction of a system holding. Harold stored his slate. Ingrid checked rope lines once more. Leif walked the lanes and listened to the last whispers of the day, now softer, now more restful. The sheep was back. The camp could sleep. Chapter 8. The Wedding Contract and the List of Things. The 8th day of the Thing arrived with the soft rhythm of a camp that had begun to trust its own routines. Fires were lit early. Water was carried with fewer complaints. Harold Ash looked less haunted by the idea of dampness, which meant the world had improved in a measurable way. Owen Greybeard stood in the open space and watched people gather. They moved with the quiet purpose of those who had learned that if they arrived on time, they would leave sooner. This was the closest thing to joy that law could offer. Leif Miller drifted near the edge, listening to the small streams of gossip that fed the camp like rain. Brent Hale had become quieter since the sheep incident, which was a community service nobody had requested but everyone appreciated. Jasper Thorne had replaced the missing oar as promised, and the boat owners had begun to speak to each other like people who might share a winter without setting traps. Hazelbrook and Jasper Thorne continued to be not promised in a way that required constant confirmation. The camp had adjusted its rumour into a new shape. Now it was not a secret engagement. Now it was an inevitable future. This was how humans protected themselves from uncertainty. They replaced it with certainty, even when the certainty was invented. That morning, a wedding matter arrived at the Thing, and it arrived with the careful dignity of people who wanted a public record more than they wanted romance. A woman named Alice Fern stepped forward with her father, Edwin Fern, and her mother, Clara Fern. Alice was calm. She was not shy. She simply looked like a person who had decided to keep her feelings private until everyone else stopped talking. Opposite them stood a man named Hugh Linton with his uncle Walter Linton and his aunt Miriam Linton. Hugh looked polite and slightly tense. Walter Linton looked like he had been waiting for this moment since before Hugh was born. Miriam Linton looked calm in a way that made people nervous. Harold wrote names. Ingrid Reed stood nearby with a steady gaze that reminded everyone that the camp had lanes, not personal kingdoms. Rowan Pike watched from the trader lane with mild interest because wedding contracts meant lists, and lists meant purchases. Owen waited until the crowd quieted, then guided the matter into simple steps. "This is a contract discussion," he confirmed, "not a dispute yet." Walter Linton cleared his throat and began as if he had been rehearsing. "Hugh Linton intends to marry Alice Fern," he stated. "We have discussed terms. We have agreed on most. We ask the Thing to witness and record the agreement so that no one remembers it differently later." The crowd made a soft approving sound. Everyone enjoyed the idea of preventing future arguments. Everyone also knew that prevention was an optimistic hobby. Edwin Fern nodded once. "We agree," he replied. "We want the terms recorded clearly. This is not because we distrust the Lintons. It is because memory is a traitor that wears a friendly face." Owen accepted this with a small nod, then turned his attention to the real heart of it. The list. "Harold," Owen prompted gently, "do you have the items as submitted?" Harold lifted his slate and read in calm words. The list included household goods, cloth, a measure of silver, tools for a new home, and a promise of support in lean seasons. All sensible, all common, all very capable of becoming a problem. As Harold read, Clara Fern watched Walter Linton closely. Walter watched Clara too. Both looked calm, both were counting. When Harold finished, Owen looked along both families. "State what is not agreed," Owen invited, voice even. Miriam Linton stepped half a pace forward. Her tone was polite, and her politeness was sharp. "We do not agree on what is meant by a complete bed," she said. Several people in the crowd smiled softly. A bed was never debtor bed. It was a symbol of comfort, status, and future complaints about who had provided what. Clara Fern replied without raising her voice. "A complete bed means frame, mattress, blanket, and proper covering. Not a plank and a hope." Walter Linton made a slow sound in his throat, as if the idea of blanket requirements offended him personally. "In our house," Walter began, "a bed is a frame and what a person brings to it." Alice Fern stood very still. Hugh Linton looked at the ground as if the ground might provide a better list. Owen did not allow the tone to drift into insult. He shaped it back into procedure. "Describe what each side intends to provide," Owen instructed. "No poetry, no tradition statements. Items." Harold shifted his slate slightly, pleased to hear the word items. Miriam Linton listed what the Lintons intended to provide: a bed frame, a wool blanket, and a length of cloth for a cover. Clara Fern listed what the Ferns intended to provide: a stuffed mattress and a second blanket. Edwin Fern added that the couple would also receive a small chest for storage, because young people collected objects the way older people collected regrets. Walter Linton frowned slightly. "A chest is unnecessary," he muttered. Ingrid Reed, passing behind him, paused just long enough to land a calm comment without aiming it at anyone. "Young people always need a chest," she observed. "If not for goods, then for the stories they refused to throw away. Walter looked as if he wanted to disagree, then decided he did not want Ingrid to look at him again. Owen returned to the list. So the bed will be complete by joint provision, Owen summarized. Frame and blanket from the Lintons, mattress and blanket from the Ferns, covering cloth from the Lintons. Agreed. Both sides nodded, and the crowd released a small breath. One item was now trapped safely in words. Then the next disagreement arrived, because lists were like that. If a list did not contain a disagreement, it would be too short. Edwin Fern spoke carefully. We also do not agree on the phrase standard expectations, he said. Walter Linton lifted his chin. Standard expectations are standard, he insisted. Clara Fern kept her voice mild. If they are standard, Clara replied, list them. The crowd made another soft sound. Not laughter exactly, more like the shared pleasure of watching a vague phrase get forced into daylight. Owen nodded. List them, he repeated, tone gentle but firm. Walter Linton began listing, and the list began reasonable and then wandered into the kinds of promises that created decades of quiet resentment. Support in winter, he said. A share of fish when the lake is generous. Help with roof repair if storms come. A cow loan if needed. Clara Fern held up a hand slightly. Polite interruption. Cow loan, she repeated. Walter nodded as if cow loans were as common as rain. A cow may be lent for a season, he explained. Everyone knows this. Clara Fern looked at Edwin Fern, then back to Walter. Everyone does not know this, she replied. Also, cow loans are the beginning of arguments about what a cow is and whether it returned in the same mood. Harold wrote cow loan in words, likely with a private feeling that the day had become complicated in a satisfying way. Owen guided the question into a calmer shape. If a cow loan is offered, it must be defined, Owen stated. Duration, conditions, and what happens if the cow produces less than expected. Walter blinked slowly. Defining a cow in public was a humbling experience. Miriam Linton stepped in smoothly, voice calm. We can remove the cow loan, she offered. Instead, we can promise labour support, which is easier to measure than cow temper. Clara Fern nodded once, pleased to see sense. Labour support is acceptable, she replied. Define it. Harold's stylus moved again. Owen watched the families and felt the familiar truth. People loved tradition until tradition required clarity. Then they wanted a clerk. As the list continued, another small tension surfaced, and this carried a delicate social sting. Alice Fern will bring her own cooking pot, Walter Linton declared. Clara Fern stiffened slightly. A pot was a pot, but also a statement. It said who provided the means to feed. It said who had the right to complain about stew. Alice Fern finally spoke, and her voice was calm enough to stop the crowd without effort. I will bring a pot because I want a pot, she stated, not because a pot is a condition of respect. Hugh Linton lifted his eyes and looked at her with a quiet relief, like a man grateful someone else had spoken the obvious. Owen nodded slowly. He liked this. Not drama, clarity. Then it is recorded as Alice's preference, Owen decided, not as a requirement. No one will pretend later that a pot was a test. Harold wrote it down. The pot was now safe from interpretation. Rowan Pike, watching from his lane, looked mildly disappointed. He had hoped the families would argue longer and then buy a second pot from him out of spite. The last unresolved item was the one everyone had been circling without naming. The bride gift. The part that always sounded romantic and always behaved like property. Miriam Linton stated it plainly. A silver band will be provided, she said. Modest, suitable. Clara Fern lifted her brows slightly. Suitable to who, she asked, because suitable was another of those words that caused trouble. Owen raised a hand gently. This is not a contest, he reminded them. It is a record. Alice Fern spoke again, calm and steady. I do not need a band to prove anything, she said, but if a band is part of custom, then a band should not be an insult. Walter Linton's mouth tightened. He wanted to call that statement dramatic. He could not because it was too reasonable. Hugh Linton took a breath, then spoke in a quiet voice that sounded like a man choosing peace. We will provide a band that is not an insult, he stated. That simple sentence softened the air. Miriam Linton nodded once, satisfied. Clara Fern nodded once, satisfied. Harold wrote it down, likely thinking that if all disputes could be solved with one honest sentence, he would have time for a nap. Owen concluded the matter by repeating the agreement in calm words, then directing Harold to read it back to both families. Harold did so, and both families confirmed. The agreement was witnessed, recorded, and now too heavy to be lifted by creative memory. As the crowd drifted away, Ingrid Reed moved through the lanes with her quiet efficiency. She noticed 2 tents pitched too close together near the family lane, a placement that created tension in the way 2 cats sharing a blanket created tension. The families involved were not enemies, they simply breathed too loudly near each other. Ingrid stopped, checked the rope lines, then spoke one sentence. "This tent moves 3 paces east." The tent owner blinked. "But we have already settled," he began. Ingrid waited, calm. The tent owner moved it. Everyone else pretended they had not seen because it was better for pride that way. Leif watched this and felt the soft comfort of camp bureaucracy. It did not sparkle, it did not thrill, it simply prevented small irritations from growing teeth. That evening, the cooking fires burned low. The air smelled like broth and damp wood. The wedding families ate in their own groups, calmer now, their future arguments neatly delayed by careful wording. Hugh Linton walked past Alice Fern once in the lane. They did not touch, they did not speak long, they simply exchanged a look that carried the quiet understand that their lives were now tied to a list of things, and a promise to keep that list from becoming a weapon. In the dark, the lake held the sky. The camp held its whispers. The thing held its record. Chapter 9. The Witness Who Would Rather Nat. The 9th day arrived with the tired softness that settled over the thing near the end. People moved more slowly. They yawned without shame. Even the arguments sounded less sharp, as if the camp itself had absorbed some of the tension and was now returning it in smaller pieces. Harold Ash looked as if he had been carrying the same slate for a year instead of a week. Owen Greybeard looked calm as ever, which was either true calm or the kind of calm that arrived when a person accepted that nothing would surprise him anymore. Leif Miller noticed that gossip had changed flavour. Early in the thing, gossip was curious and bright. Now it was practical. Who was leaving tomorrow? Who had settled? Who had not? Who was quietly furious and pretending it was only tiredness? Rowan Pike still smiled, but his smile had begun to look slightly strained, like a merchant trying to sell cheerfulness at the end of a long market day. The main case of the day began as a simple matter, which meant it would not stay simple. A man named Caleb Ward stepped forward with his hands held carefully in front of him, palms open, like he wanted everyone to understand he had come in peace. Caleb was known in his home valley for being steady and quiet. This made it more unsettling that he was here at all. Opposite him stood a woman named Ruth Carter, who held herself like a person who did not enjoy public attention, but enjoyed fairness enough to tolerate it. Harold recorded their names. Owen waited. Caleb Ward spoke first, voice low. "A clasp is missing. A bronze cloak clasp. It belonged to my mother. It was in my tent. It is now not in my tent." The crowd made a soft murmur. A clasp was not a great treasure, but it was personal. Personal losses created the kind of anger that kept people awake. Ruth Carter replied in a calm voice. "He believes I took it." Caleb did not rush. He did not accuse with heat. That made the accusation sharper. "I believe you have it," he confirmed. "I saw it on your cloak yesterday near the cooking fires." Ruth's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in focus. "I have a bronze clasp," she replied. "It is mine, it is not your mother's." Owen guided the matter into steps. "Caleb, describe the clasp." Caleb described it carefully. Round. Simple knot pattern. A small nick near the edge, as if it had been dropped on stone long ago. He spoke of it with the quiet reverence of someone speaking about a memory. Ruth described her clasp. Round. Knot pattern. No nick. She claimed it had belonged to her aunt. She had worn it for years. She did not enjoy being treated as if she had only thus invented metal. Owen listened and then asked the question that always turned people uncomfortable. Witnesses. Caleb named a witness who would rather not exist, a man named Jonas Pike, no relation to Rowan, who had been near the cooking fires yesterday and had apparently seen the clasp on Ruth's cloak. Jonas stepped forward slowly, face pale with reluctance. Leif watched Jonas and recognized the posture. This was the posture of a man who had seen something minor and now regretted having eyes. Ruth named a witness too, a woman named Elsie Marsh, who confirmed that Ruth had worn a similar clasp in previous seasons. Harold wrote, Owen listened, and the camp leaned in because this was the kind of case that felt small but could turn poisonous. Owen invited Jonas Pike to speak. Jonas stepped forward and stared at the ground for a moment as if the ground might offer him a different life. I do not want to be involved, he began. Owen replied calmly, You are involved because you saw something. Speak plainly, and it will pass. Jonas swallowed. I saw Ruth by the fires yesterday, he stated. I saw a bronze clasp. It looked like Caleb's description, with a small nick. But I did not hold it, I did not touch it, I did not examine it. I was carrying water and trying not to slip. Owen nodded. Did you see Caleb's clasp before it went missing? Jonas hesitated. I saw something like it once, he admitted. On Caleb's cloak, earlier in the week. Owen let the words settle. Not proof, but a thread. Then Owen asked a calmer question that sounded like kindness. Jonas, why do you hesitate? Jonas looked up, eyes tired. Because if I speak, someone will be angry with me. If I speak less, someone will be angry with me. If I speak more, everyone will remember my name. Harold's stylus paused for a breath, as if Harold recognized a fellow sufferer. The crowd made a soft sound of sympathy. Everyone understood the pain of being remembered. Owen kept the tone gentle. Speak only what you know. Jonas nodded and repeated the limited facts. He saw a clasp. It appeared nicked. He could not swear it was Caleb's clasp. He wished the clasp had stayed in the earth. Owen accepted that, then turned to Elsie Marsh, Ruth's witness. Elsie confirmed Ruth had worn a similar clasp long before the thing. Elsie admitted she could not speak to nicks because she did not enjoy staring at other people's cloaks. Owen then invited Ruth to show her clasp. Ruth held her cloak edge steady and lifted the clasp so those near could see. Owen did not touch it. Harold did not touch it. Ingrid Reed, standing nearby, did not touch it, but her eyes did what touch might have done. The clasp had a nick, small, near the edge. Ruth's face tightened slightly. That nick was not there before, she stated. Caleb's shoulders rose slightly, then fell. It was there on my mother's clasp, he replied quietly. The air shifted. A small object had become a large feeling. Owen did not let the feeling take control. He returned to steps. Ruth, do you have any reason the nick would appear? Ruth hesitated, then admitted something that sounded innocent, but also sounded like life. I dropped my cloak yesterday on a stone near the fire, she stated. The clasp could have struck. Caleb made a small sound that might have been skepticism. Owen nodded. Possible. Then Owen asked the question that mattered most and sounded most boring. Where was Caleb's clasp kept, and who had access to his tent? Caleb admitted his tent flap had been tied loosely. He did not like to make it tight because he did not like to feel trapped. He had assumed nobody would enter. He had assumed the camp was decent. Owen did not correct him out loud. The camp corrected him with a soft murmur of reality. Ruth stated she had not entered Caleb's tent. She stated she had no need to. She stated she had her own clasp and her own life. Owen looked at Caleb, then Ruth, then Harold. No clear proof of theft exists, Owen stated calmly, but a strong suspicion exists. We will not punish a suspicion, we will try to solve the loss. He turned to Ruth. Ruth, if your clasp truly belonged to your aunt, you may show any mark or memory that confirms it. If Caleb's clasp truly belonged to his mother, he may show any mark or memory that confirms it. If both are true, then perhaps two similar clasps exist, and the camp has created a story out of tired eyes. The crowd made a quiet sound. This was the disappointment of not getting a villain. Then Owen added the part that made the case feel useful. However, Owen continued, if Ruth has Caleb's clasp by mistake, perhaps taken up in confusion, the correct act is simple. Return it now without shame. Confusion is common. Refusal is a choice. Ruth's eyes stayed steady. She did not flare, she did not tremble. Then she did something that surprised the crowd. She reached into a fold of her cloak and produced a second clasp. It was wrapped in cloth like something delicate. She held it out and unwrapped it slowly. "This was in my bundle," she stated. "I did not know it was there until this morning. I thought it was a spare pin. I did not look closely. I was tired." The clasp was round, knot pattern, with a small nick near the edge. Caleb inhaled softly. His face did not show triumph. It showed relief, which was the kinder emotion. Ruth's voice stayed calm. "I did not enter his tent," she stated. "I did not take it on purpose. Someone must have placed it in my bundle, or it caught in cloth when people brushed past, or I picked it up by mistake near the fires. I do not know, but I am returning it." Owen accepted the clasp, careful not to touch it more than needed, and handed it to Caleb. Caleb received it with both hands, as if receiving something fragile. The crowd released a breath. The case had found an ending that did not demand cruelty. Everyone preferred this, even those who wanted drama. Owen then addressed the witness who would rather not. "Jonas Pike," Owen stated, "thank you for speaking despite your discomfort. You have done your duty." Jonas looked as if he had been told he could go home forever. Harold wrote the resolution. Ruth apologized in a simple sentence, and the apology sounded like exhaustion more than guilt, which was honest. Then the smaller theft case arrived, because the day was not finished with objects. A man named Brent Hale stepped forward again, and the crowd made a low sound that meant, "Not you again, quietly please." Brent held a wooden bowl in his hands as if it were sacred, and also as if it had been personally wronged. "My bowl was taken," he stated. Leif felt a gentle amusement rise and then settle. Bowls have become the symbol of this camp. Bowls, portions, stew, and the endless human fear of being slightly cheated. Ingrid Reed stood at the edge of the open space with a face that promised patience had a limit. Owen kept the tone calm. "Describe the bowl." Brent described it with too much passion. "Carved rim. Small chip. Made by his cousin. Very meaningful. Also he would like it back because it fit his hands." Then someone from the cooking fires, the older woman who had been watching stew since day one, stepped forward and solved it without drama. "Your bowl is by the second pot," she stated. "You left it there while complaining about stew thickness. You then complained about it missing while it sat in plain sight." The crowd made a warm murmur. Brent's face warmed. Ingrid Reed did not smile, but the air around her felt slightly lighter. Owen inclined his head. "Then the bowl case is resolved by remembering," he concluded. Brent retrieved his bowl in silence, which was the best case outcome for everyone. That night, after the formal matters were done, Owen sat near a low fire with a small circle of listeners. This was not an official part of the thing, but it was something Owen did near the end, when people needed their minds softened before departure. He told a calm story in a steady voice. A story about a man who borrowed a tool and returned it late, then insisted he had returned it early, then became angry when the owner asked for clarity. The story was gentle and slightly sarcastic. It ended with the man learning that pride was heavier than any tool, and that the easiest way to carry it was to set it down. The listeners nodded softly. Some felt personally addressed. Nobody admitted it. That was the beauty of stories. They offered advice without requiring confession. The camp settled. The lake held the night. Harold stored the slate. Ingrid walked the lanes once more, quiet as ever. The thing was nearly done. People could almost taste departure. Chapter 10. Closing the thing and packing the piece. The final day arrived with the strange stillness that comes when a temporary village knows it will soon vanish. Tents looked slightly less permanent. Fires were smaller. People spoke with the careful tone of those who wanted to leave without creating one last problem that would follow them down the road. Harold Ash stood near the open space with his slate and the expression of a man who had survived something. Owen Greybeard stood beside him, with the calm posture of someone who had seen many things begin and end and knew that the ending was always the same. People left with their disputes either settled or neatly postponed, and both outcomes were treated as victory. Ingrid Reed moved through the lanes, making small decisions that prevented chaos at departure. She reminded people to douse fires properly. She reminded people not to leave broken stakes in the ground. She reminded people that if they had borrowed a pot, they would return the pot, and if they had improved the stew without permission, they would not mention it. Leif Miller walked a slow loop, watching tents being folded, watching bundles being tied, watching friendships being remeasured into safe travel groups. Leaving was a social event. People pretended it was only walking. Owen began the closing session with the calm tone of a person reading the last lines of a long document. "If you have a final petition, bring it now," he invited. "If you have a complaint that can wait until next year, consider letting it wait, because you deserve rest." The crowd made a soft murmur of agreement. Rest was a rare and precious thing. 2 final disputes remained, and both were the kind that everyone wanted finished before the road began. The first was a boundary compromise that had been circling the edges of camp like a patient bird. It involved Cedric North again, because Cedric had a special relationship with Earth. Cedric stepped forward with Harlan Beck and Della Crow. The presence of Della meant the matter would end cleanly, because Della did not enjoy prolonged nonsense. Cedric spoke with careful restraint. "We have marked the line as ordered. We have set stakes from the hedge stump and the North Bend stone. But the strip near the ditch remains annoying," he admitted, and that was a rare honest word in a boundary case. Harlan Beck nodded once. "It is annoying," he agreed. "It is also reality." Owen listened, then asked for the measured record. Harold read the measures back in calm words. The line was fair. It was stable. It also required Cedric to accept that some of his imagined meadow had never been his meadow. Cedric's face carried the quiet grief of a man losing grass he had already spent in his mind. Owen offered a compromise that was technically fair and emotionally annoying, which was the best kind of fair. The boundary stands as marked. Cedric will move his fence to the safe distance from the ditch as advised. In exchange, Harlan will allow Cedric's seasonal use of the strip for cutting grass only, not for grazing, and only during the dry weeks, and only if Cedric helps maintain the ditch. This use does not change ownership, it changes cooperation. Cedric's eyes narrowed slightly because the word cooperation tasted like swallowing pride. Harlan's face stayed calm, but his shoulders lowered a fraction. He liked the idea of ditch help. Della Crow nodded once. "This is sensible," she stated. "If either of you breaks the terms, I will personally remind you what shame feels like." The crowd made a low, warm sound. Della was a public resource. Harold recorded the compromise. Cedric and Harlan nodded, not as friends, but as neighbours who had agreed to stop trying to unalive each other with paperwork. Then the last major matter arrived, and it was what everyone had been waiting for: Rowan Pike and his accounts. Rowan stepped forward with his usual tidy boots and a smile that tried to look casual. Behind him stood Mara Finch, calm as ever, and also slightly tired in the way a person became tired when they had witnessed too many convenient memories. Opposite Rowan stood Gareth Clay, arms folded, face steadied. Also present was Peter Wood, who had returned to the camp to confirm the horse adjustment, because Peter had become the unofficial clerk of human honesty. Harold lifted his slate, and the crowd leaned in. They like watching a trader meet the hard edge of record. Owen looked at Rowan. "You were ordered to settle the remaining silver owed to Gareth Clay by the end of this thing," Owen reminded him. Rowan nodded. "Yes." Owen did not ask for poetry, he asked for proof. "Show the payment." Rowan produced a small pouch of silver and handed it to Harold for counting, because Harold was the camp's best defense against charm. Harold counted slowly and carefully, moving pieces with the quiet devotion of a man who believed numbers were the closest thing to truth humans had invented. "The amount is correct," Harold confirmed. The crowd released a soft breath. One debt was now safely unalive and buried. Gareth Clay nodded once, satisfied, still irritated, because irritation was his natural finishing flourish. Then Owen turned to the horse matter. Rowan was ordered to provide additional value to adjust for the difference between what was promised and what was delivered, Owen reminded him. Neutral traders judged the difference. Ingrid Reed stepped forward because she had been the one to select the neutral traders. She did not look at Rowan, she did not need to. Her presence was enough. The neutral traders decided on a fair adjustment, Ingrid stated. Rowan will provide salt and iron tools equal to that value to Peter Wood's father within none month. It will be witnessed and recorded by the elders of their home lane. Rowan nodded quickly. Agreed. Owen watched him for a moment, then did the most dangerous thing to a man like Rowan. He removed the crowd from the equation. Rowan Pike, Owen stated calmly, you have met the terms this year, but your pattern creates work for others. If you wish to remain welcome at the thing, arrive next year with fewer misunderstandings. Harold has limited sympathy. Harold did not smile. His lack of smile was a public statement. Rowan bowed his head slightly, accepting the correction in a way that looked humble enough to be believable. Understood, Rowan replied. Leif watched and felt a quiet satisfaction, not because Rowan had been defeated. Rowan had not been defeated, but because the camp had protected itself. Procedure had held. Charm had been measured and found insufficient against a slate. With the final dispute settled, Owen moved into the closing of the thing. This part was always calm and slightly emotional, not because people loved law, but because endings made people feel tender, even when they pretended they did not. Owen thanked the witnesses who had spoken, he thanked those who had shown restraint, he thanked Ingrid Reed for keeping the camp ordered, and Ingrid accepted the thanks with a small nod that suggested she would accept stew as payment instead. Owen reminded everyone that the decisions recorded would stand, and that if they returned next year with the same disputes, the camp would remember their names in a way that would be unpleasant. The crowd murmured softly. Nobody wanted to be remembered for repetitive nonsense. Harold read a short summary of the major recorded agreements, not because people needed it, but because people liked hearing that their suffering had produced a document. As the session ended, the camp began to fold itself. Tents came down, stakes were pulled, bundles were tied with practiced hands, people exchanged quiet farewells, promises to visit, promises to trade, promises that were sincere in the moment and would be tested by distance. Edith Stone packed her goods with steady care. She looked tired, but her tiredness was calmer now, the tiredness of someone who had survived the worst part and could now return to private grief without private threats. Hazel Brook and Jasper Thorne stood near the boat lane, speaking quietly about oars and schedules. They were still not promised. They were simply talking in the calm way that made the camp whisper anyway. If they did become promised later, it would be because they had learned they could share a plan without unaliving each other with irritation. Brent Hale avoided Ingrid Reed's gaze and focused intensely on tying his bundles, which was a wise choice. His voice stayed low. His opinions stayed inside his tent, which was now folded and therefore forced into silence. Rowan Pike packed his goods with efficient hands and a smile that looked slightly more honest than before, or perhaps slightly more tired. He nodded at Harold once in passing, and Harold responded with a polite neutral look that suggested the nod had been recorded and evaluated. Leif Miller walked toward the edge of camp and looked back once. The open space was empty now. The lake reflected the afternoon sky. The Valley of Laws looked as peaceful as it always did when nobody was standing in it claiming grass. Owen Greybeard remained for a moment longer, watching the last tents come down. Then he turned and walked away, calm as ever, carrying the quiet knowledge that next year the same humans would return with new disputes and old habits, and the system would hold again, because it had to. The camp vanished into the roads the way it had arrived, in lines that looked accidental from a distance and purposeful up close, and the valley became quiet again, holding only wind, grass, and the memory of words trapped safely on slate.